introduce you now to the lecture. 네, 오늘 그 유재스페셜 6번째 강좌입니다. 기존 코로나 바이러스 때문에 많은 분들이 참여를 못하시지만 오늘 정말 재미있고 유익한 강좌인데 좀 아쉽습니다. 오늘 그 녹화를 해서 다른 회원분들도 보실 수 있게 준비를 하겠습니다. 오늘 그 특강 해주실 안나그리칭 박사님에 대해서 아주 간단하게 말씀드리겠습니다. 그리칭 박사님은 하버드 대학교에서 도시 디자인으로 박사학위를 받으셨고요. 현재는 버몬트 대학교에서 환경 외교 안보센터 IEDS에서 선임연구원으로 재직 중이십니다. 박사님은 앞서 제네바 대학교, 하버드 대학교, MIT 대학, 카타르 대학에서 강의하셨고 또 특이하게도 이런 스위스, 미국, 파키스탄, 카타르 등지에서 음악가로도 활동하셨습니다. 그래서 학자가 아니라 뮤지션으로서도 활발하게 활동하시는 분입니다. 그래서 박사님의 주요 관심사 가운데 하나가 전 세계 분쟁 지역, 접경 지역에서의 생태 보전, 그곳에서의 인간과 협력 방안, 문화유산, 지속 가능한 개발이고 이번 평창 평화 포럼에서도 DMZ의 세계유산으로서의 가치에 대해서 발표하실 계획입니다. 그 평창에 가시기 전에 유재스페셜에서 이렇게 또 다른 강의를 해주셔서 상당히 영광입니다. 그 학자이자 예술가인 그리칭 박사님은 학제관 연구 또 이런 단순한 학술이 아니라 여기다가 문화와 예술을 접목시키는 그런 시도를 많이 펼치셨고요. 인간과 자연의 협력 같은 새로운 관점과 방법론을 제시해 주셨기 때문에 어쩌면 저희 지구와사람 어떤 지향과 많은 부분에서 닮은 것 같습니다. 교수님의 최근 저서를 보면 Social Ecology of Border Landscapes, 접경 지역에서의 사회 생태학 하셨고, Stitching the Border Job, 완충지역, 꿰매기 이런 식의 또 저서도 많이 하고 계시고요. 아까 제가 말씀드렸듯이 이제 뮤지션으로서 활동하시는데 보더 미팅스라는 음반도 내셨습니다. 보면은 접경 지역에서 어떤 그 소재와 주제를 가지고 음악도 만들어 주셨고, 그래서 오늘 강의에서 또 이 음악과 이 예술적인 부분에 대해서 좀 말씀을 해주시지 않을까 기대가 됩니다. 그러면 저희 귀하게 모신 안나그리칭 박사님을 큰 박수와 함께.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here today, and I'm very grateful for your invitation. Thank you so much. Would you prefer I sit, or would you prefer if I'm seated, or
what would you prefer?
is it better for you? You're more comfortable
Yes, I
if
guess
I'm
so.
seated.
Yeah. Unless you're not comfortable sitting.
If you're more comfortable, okay, yeah. So for my presentation, I will. I apologize beforehand if some of the things maybe you already know, because of course a lot of you are, very. You've done a lot of conferences and work on the DMZ. So I apologize beforehand if any of this is things that you already know. So I'm going to present my work that I've done on Cyprus and Germany, and try to make some links between the Korean demilitarized zone, Cyprus, and the Iron Curtain Greenbelt, and then to sort of think about the future, how we can address the question of the DMZ in the future.
우선 시작하기 전에 여러분께서 이미 DMZ에 대해서 공부도 많이 하시고 아시는 게 있기 때문에 이미 아는 게 있으실지 몰랐는데 그거에 대해서 양해를 부탁드립니다. 그리고 이번 프레젠테이션은 사이프러스와 독일 케이스를 볼 텐데 우리나라와 DMZ와도 어떤 연관성이 있고 그를 통해서 앞으로 우리나라의 DMZ의 미래를 생각해 볼 수 있는 그런 프레젠테이션이 되길 바랍니다.
So this is an outline of how I've tried to structure this presentation, and to present the concept of social ecological approaches, and that's the book that I've given you, that I've recently published. then also looking at UNESCO and the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, UNESCO cultural sites, and also a concept I think is important, which is biocultural diversity and world heritage. And then also looking at different scales of approaching peace building. And then obviously there's different stakeholders, multi-stakeholder approaches. And then looking at, what are buffer zones and borders, and then starting to look at these different examples. And as I mentioned here, some case studies, and then starting to think about the future of the Korean DMZ.
우선 오늘 나올 내용을 이렇게 차례를 통해서 보게 되는데요. 첫 번째는 사회 생태적 접근 방법에 대해서 보게 될 테고, 또 있는 것이 유네스코에서 바이오컬처럴, 그러면은 생태 문화적 이 다양성에 대해서도 보게 될 거고요. 그 다음에 이제 스케일이라는 게 굉장히 중요한데, 이 스케일을 통해서 피스 빌딩, 평화를 갖다가 구축하는 데 있어서도 이제 스케일이 있는데, 그런 어프로치에 대해서 접근 방법에 대해서도 보게 되고, 또 이렇게 피스 빌딩에 있어서는 항상 이해관계자들이 있는데, 이해관계자들은 어떤 역할을 하는지도 보게 되고, 그리고 버퍼존이라는 이 버퍼라는 컨셉이 굉장히 많이 나오는데요. 어떤 완충지나 완충 구조를 얘기하게 되는데, 이것을 통해서 그다음에 케이스 스터디로 우리나라에 어떻게 적용될 수 있는지도 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
So I will just say that as you'll see, the presentation is not necessarily a very linear one, and as you explained, I'm an architect, an urbanist, also a musician, and I've done some art. So I hope you'll excuse me for sort of bringing all these approaches together, and actually I also really welcome on your behalf, to give me insights and ideas, about what I'm thinking about, and I really like to have your input, and even critical input I would welcome very much.
미리 말씀드릴게 이렇게 보다 보면 이렇게 직선적인 순서가 아니거든요. 근데 아까 설명했던 것 같이 하시는 일이 건축가, 도시계획가, 그리고 이제 음악도 하시다 보니까 어떤 직선적인 그런 접근 방법보다는 서로 같이 공유하고 이런 리니하지 않은 것을 선호하시기 때문에, 여러분들께서도 중간에 궁금하신 것이 있거나 또는 어떻게 보면은 이쪽에 크리티컬 그런 한 내용도 서로 공유하고, 여러분 이것에 대한 여러분들의 생각을 같이 공유할 수 있는 그런 시간이 되길 바랍니다.
So the work that I do is really inspired by this phrase, which is "borders are the scars of history," which is Robert Schuman, who was one of the founders of the European Union. And my concept is really that that what we want to do is to make a beautiful scar. It's not that we want to erase what happened, but we really want to make something beautiful to commemorate what has happened. And this is an architect, an Italian architect. Do you want to? Yeah.
거기는 아까 넘어가도 되겠죠?
An Italian architect, and these territorial chasms, which is these borders, they offer unique opportunities to reweave coherent relationships between disrupted networks, fabrics, ecologies, and societies through imaginative and far-sighted projects. So there I want to situate myself as an architect and urbanist, and that our job is really to sort of create these projects and visions. And that's what he saw, this opportunity in these border spaces for architects and urbanists.
이분도 건축가고 도시계획가인데, 이분이 이제 접경 지역을 갖다가 이렇게 보는 건데요. 굉장히 조금 특이한 시각으로 보고 계시죠. 이제 일단 이 접경 지역은 자기 역할을 이제 못하고 퇴화됐다고 보고 있거든요. 그래서 퇴화된 후에는 그래서 이런 거를 지역적 차슴이라고 하는데, 조금은 돌짝이나 이런 벌어진 것을 차슴이라고 하잖아요. 이런 접경 지역을 territorial chasm이라고 보는데, 이것들은 아주 특별한 기회를 갖다가 제공하는데, 그것은 reweave, 다시 이렇게 뜨개질하듯이 이렇게 integrate 할 적에 이렇게 뜨개질하듯이 이걸 저것들을 하나로 가져오는 건데요. relationships, coherent relationships니까 말이 되는, 서로 이게 뭔가가 make sense 하는 그런 관계를 갖다가 만드는데, 그것들이 뭐를 통해서 이루고 있냐면은 네트워크스, 이거 부서진 네트워크스, 그리고 어떤 사회의 이런 fabric라면 어떤 표면 같은 걸 얘기하거든요. 그리고 ecologies, societies, 그래서 이 모든 것들이 다 하나의 이렇게 큰 그림같이 한꺼번에 모이게 되는데 그것을 할 수 있는 것은 imaginative, 상상력이 있고 그다음에 멀리 시야가 먼 그런 프로젝트를 통해서 이루어질 수 있다고 건축가가 말을 하셨습니다.
So here I'm showing, obviously you know the demilitarized zone, but this idea from a deep wound to a beautiful scar. So it's this idea that this DMZ, it's for the moment it's actually still a wound between the two countries, but the potential is that we could make a beautiful scar between the two countries.
우리나라죠.
Sorry.
근데
Yes.
지금은 아직은 스카라고 상처라고 볼 수 있는데, sorry, 지금은 아직 그런데
Yeah.
이제
From the
이것이
wound
앞으로
to the scar.
지금은 그냥 열려 있는 상처가 치대 있는데 앞으로는 이렇게 흉터가 되겠죠. 네, 흉터가 되었을 때는 아름다운 흉터로 될 수 있도록 그게 이 프로젝트의 목적입니다.
And a scar, to make a beautiful scar, there has to be a good stitching. So,
꼬매는 잘 꼬매야지 상처가 이쁘게 되죠.
so this year is, we can see that not only do we have the 70 years of the start of the Korean War and the 75 years of the United Nations, but it's also the 30 years of German reunification. And so that's a very symbolic date as well. So it's interesting to be able to think about these things together. So Germany, this is a project called, it started with the German Greenbelt in Germany here, and this is actually the patrol path of the Iron Curtain that separated, you know, the East and the West, East and West Germany and East and West Europe. And what's interesting about this project is the vision is actually to make it all along the, I don't think, is it working? Just to make it all along the, I think maybe this, oh no, sorry, it doesn't work, yeah. To make it all along the European, the Iron Curtain green belt. So,
저 지역이 지금 아이언 커튼이 동서를 독일 동독과 서독을 나눴을 적에 그때 군인들이 정찰하던 그 라인이거든요. 이렇게.
yeah, okay, it's okay, I can
It's
do
very
it.
faint.
Yes. Okay. So, what's very interesting is you can also see that there's all these species, you know, sort of flagship species or endangered species that have habitats. And I'll talk a little bit more about it afterwards. But what's really interesting is that this was initiated by bird watchers who were living around this area. And then it became a project of the German Bund, and then it was implemented by the government. But what's really interesting here is to see how some of these projects are actually coming from the bottoms up and from the people, and not always from the top down. And so now you can cycle all the way along the German green belts.
이 점은 독일의 그린벨트 같은 경우에는 여기서 보시다시피 되게 많은 동물들이 희귀종들이나 유명한 이렇게 플래그십 그런 하는 동물들이 있는데요. 여기서 이 길도 지금 자전거를 탈 수 있게 개발이 되었고 이 프로젝트는 흥미로운 게 bird watchers라고 그랬잖아요. 그러면 취미로 조류학자들뿐만이 아니고 취미로 새 보는 사람들 있죠. 이렇게 그런 분들이 시작을 해가지고 위에서 한 게 아니고 아래서 이렇게 사람들로부터 시작이 된 그런 프로젝트입니다.
So this is just obviously to remind us the 70 years of the start of the war. So that means that there was these forces from the north and the south, and then pushing back, and then finally that's how we came with this line, this demilitarized, this ceasefire line or demilitarized zone. And this is just an image actually where you can actually see, this is Google Earth. This is I think in the, what is it, Guangzhou area. But what you can do is you can actually see, you know, the area of the DMZ where this is the urbanization and the urbanization, and you can kind of see this wound or this scar as well in the landscape because there's no development. I'm so sorry. So this is the 75 years of the UN. Actually, I was in Durban for the UCLG conference this year, and this was launched by the Minister of Defence of South Africa, and there was also the representative of the UN, Fabrizio Hochschild, who's going to be speaking at the peace conference. He's a special envoy. So this was launched, and the idea was to plant, this is the Minister of Defence, so I was here for the tree planting, and they brought the trees with the military, but the idea is really, you know, it's like plant trees, not bombs, so carpet bombing seeds in biodegradable clay balls, and really so that the military is going to be part of this tree planting. So I thought that was an interesting, that this 75 years of the UN, this is one of the sort of projects or that's come out to you know, to and she's challenging her counterparts across the world to sort of take this on as part of the 75th anniversary of the founding of the UN. And of course it's to, you know, the increased action to reduce and halt the effects of climate change, but, you know, maybe there's also a symbolic idea of, you know, sort of that the military, you know, maybe as we go on we'll be able to use this people and energy, you know, for other things, more ecological things. So I just wanted to also remind us that the tree planting, this is in 2004, and I remember meeting, I'm sorry, do you need to translate? Sorry. Excuse me.
방금 본
Getting carried away.
유엔의 UN 75주년을 맞이해서 남아프리카 특히 국방부 장관에 의해서 이게 시작이 됐는데요. 유엔 기관들뿐만 아니고 그다음에 이제 정부에서 특히 국방부 쪽에서 참석했다는 게 조금 의미가 있고, 그다음에 7,500만 excuse me, 나무를 심고, 그게 이제 75 유엔이랑 같이 숫자를 코인사이드하게 한 건데요. 상징적인 의미도 있고, 그다음에 어떻게 보면은 밀리터리랑 엔바이러먼트랑 같이 합작을 해서 그런 새로운 프로젝트를 할 수 있다는 그런 첫 본보기가 되는 좀 중요한 행사였습니다.
And so this is Wangari Maathai. What's interesting here is that she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004.
네, 이거는 2004년에 노벨 평화상을 탄 왕가리 마타이.
Yeah, and it was the first time that peace had been associated with the environment. It's the first time a peace prize, a Nobel Peace Prize, had been given to a project on environment. So it's very important to see this link between environment and peace that we see for the first time. And I remember I was actually in Boston when I just arrived to do my PhD, and she was speaking there. So for me it was really interesting and important because I was just starting my work on my PhD, and you know, I learned about this project.
이 프로젝트가 좀 의미가 있는 거는 어떤 평화와 피스와 그리고 그다음에 생태계, 환경 쪽이 처음으로 같이 같은 분야 같이 링크돼서 보는 그런 첫 번째 프로젝트고요. 그다음에 박사님이 PhD 박사 학위를 처음 따실 적에 이분을 또 우연히 그때 만나가지고 이 프로젝트에 대해서 얘기를 들으셨다고 합니다.
And it was also about the women, because it was empowering women, you know, giving them. They were the ones who were planting the trees, which gave them economic activities, and then they were also restoring the environment.
그리고 하나의 또 중요한 의미는 이것을 통해서 여성분들이 좀 이상이 올라갈 수 있었는데 경제적으로 활동을 하게 되고, 그리고 그뿐만 아니고 환경을 돌보는 그런 중요한 위치에 여자들이 놓이게 되어서 의미가 있는 프로젝트입니다.
And what's interesting is that actually this work actually came to you know, to have an effect on policy, and she created this atlas of ecosystems and human well-being. So here we see once again the ecology and the people coming together, and so how that's translated into policy.
그래서 이 프로젝트는 나중에 정책을 갖다 만드는데도 큰 영향을 준 그런 프로젝트입니다. 특히 이것을 통해서 그 운동을 아까 그 무브먼트를 통해서 Atlas of Ecosystem, Atlas 그러면 지도를 얘기하잖아요. 그리고 Human Well-being에 대한 그런 어떤 지도 맵을 갖다가 만드는 기본적인 그 스타트가 되었습니다.
I'd like to make just a reference to Joseph Beuys, and I'm sure you maybe know him. Joseph Beuys, he was a German artist, and what's interesting, I was always fascinated by his work because he was also he was an activist, and for him art was also social action, and this was one where he was trying to save a forest from being cut down. So it was a performance art, was saving the forest. And what's really interesting as well is that he was actually one of the founders of the Green Party. So he actually founded a political party. People tend to forget this, but I think it's really interesting to see that link between the artist, the social action, and then the actual founding of a political party, which now obviously the Green Party in Germany and Europe is you know, is an important party. Yeah.
이분의 일이 활동하시는 거에 이렇게 주목할 만한 게 예술을 사회적 행위로 같이 접목시켜서 하나로 보여주는 그런 부분이 굉장히 중요한데요. 이분이 이렇게 이런 아티스트 행위만 하신 게 아니고 나중에는 굉장히 중요한 게 녹색당을 창립하셨거든요. 그래서 지금 유럽과 저머니에서는 녹색당이 꽤 중요한 위치에 있는데 시작은 이분이 하셨고 예술을 갖다가 따로 보는 게 아니고 예술과 사회와 더 나가서 정치까지 하나로 묶는 그런 역할을 하셨습니다.
이분이 요셉 보이스라는 거죠?
네.
네.
이게 다 그분이 하신 거예요. This is all achievements of the activist Joseph Beuys,
Yes.
right? He founded the Green Party.
Yes.
He did all that. He linked art,
He was
society,
one of the
politics.
founders.
One of the
yes,
founders.
of the Green
창립자
Party.
중에 한 명이에요.
Yeah.
So he took this picture, but is he in the picture?
Oh no, he didn't take this picture. He's here.
He's in the picture. The guy in the middle.
Yes.
Okay.
그게 뭐예요?
Oh.
Yeah, he always wore the pants.
Because I was wondering whether it's him or him.
Yes. Yeah, and his work is very interesting. Yeah, I can tell you about some other pieces that he did.
Everybody's finding him very interesting, you can tell.
Yeah, he's really, I was fascinated, so fascinated by him.
이것뿐만 아니고 본인께서도 되게 좋아하는 그런 프로젝트가 많다고 해요. 이분 일하신 거 보면은 굉장히 재밌는 게 많다고 합니다.
So now I'm going to just talk very briefly about this idea of socio-ecological approaches and environmental peace building. And this is just the cover of the book that I've edited with you know, the approaches, the four parts of the book, which is mapping social ecologies in border territories, then looking at bridges, resilience, restoration, reclamation, then corridors, looking at catalysts and collaboration in these confined spaces, and finally the portals, which is the dialogue, the exception or the re-territorialization of these border spaces.
이번에 에디트한 책인데요. 보면은 제목이 접경 지역의 사회 생태적 접근 방법이다 보니까 이렇게 4개 파트로 나눴는데도 어떤 프레임이나 에리어를 위주로 하시거든요. 프레임 하면 큰 그림, 그 안에 있는 브릿지, 그리고 동물들이 왔다 갔다 하는 어떤 코리도, 그리고 마지막으로 폴트, 이것들과 저것들이 연결되는 포털 같은 것들을 이렇게 나눠가지고 그 역할에 대해서도 이렇게 나와 있습니다. 그렇게 해서 4파트로 구성되어 있는 책이에요.
So I'm not going to read all of this, but any of these slides we can always go back if you want more information, but just for time's sake. But just to say that it's, I'll read what's in orange, a new integrative science that addresses the complex and interrelated relationship between nature and society, also addressing the adaptive and complex structures and processes of the social and natural world, and then, as I mentioned before, the multi-scale and multidisciplinary approaches to critical border studies.
사회 생태학의 정의인데요. 이렇게 노란 부분 읽어보시면은 어떻게 정의할 수 있는지 조금 더 쉽게 이해할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
So this is one figure from the book, and it's a chapter by Kevin Sample, and it's just looking at really the evolution of how we looked at conservation, as you can see from the 1960s. And now it's really more about, you know, nature was something very much outside itself, and the transition where it's really now, you know, people and nature, and I would say now we're actually, you know, people in nature, or, you know, it's so it's just showing, you know, the ideas and the sort of evolution, and finally here, where we're more into interdisciplinary social and ecological sciences. so just where we're situated.
아까 그 책에 나와 있는 도표 중에 하나인데요. 케빈 존컬 분이 쓰신 거예요. 근데 여기는 생태 보존학의 어떻게 사람들이 생각하는 그런 어떤 발전, 진화를 순차적으로 자연을 생태를 보존한다는 것에 대한 개념이 어떻게 바뀌었는지 쭉 나와 있고요. 최근에 2010년대를 보면 인터디스플리너리에서 모든 분야를 어우르는 그런 개념으로 바뀌어왔습니다.
This is also another diagram from the book, and it's looking at this relationship between obviously life on Earth and biodiversity, which is obviously a very important aspect, and also what we call ecosystem services. So what the ecology and nature gives us as a service, which is we can see climate regulation, flood regulation. It provides water. It's got also cultural. The nature provides all of this, and then also how it contributes to a person's well-being, whether it's security, good life, health, and good social relationships. So it's just showing those linkages.
이것도 책에 나와 있는 도표 중에 하나인데요. 우리가 봐야 되는 이게 여러 분야들이 한꺼번에 서로 관계를 맺고 그다음에 어우러져 있기 때문에 거기서 관계합을 보여주는 그런 도표입니다.
So now I'd like to talk about biocultural diversity, and I think this is interesting because we talk a lot about biodiversity, of course because it's very important today. We know we have a loss of biodiversity, and the report that was published last year on biodiversity showed how many species we're losing, but I think biological and cultural diversity is especially interesting if we're talking about social ecologies as well, because it's really linking the biological diversity and the cultural diversity.
여기서는 이제 biological culture, 다양성에 대해서 얘기하고 있는데요. 여기 보면은 constantly interacting 해가지고 이 다양성들이 하나로서만 존재하는 게 아니고 사회적이나 문화적으로 다양하면은 이쪽에서도 그게 관계를 맺는 그런 서로 연관 있는 관계에 대해서 설명을 하고 있습니다.
So this is just showing as well the sort of research that's being done about bicultural diversity. But I don't think we need to go into detail. We can always come back if somebody has if you agree, we can come back, or unless you want to go into this, because just for a question of time.
시간상 지금 도표를 보고 나중에 다시 돌아와도 되니까 이거는 좀 넘어가겠습니다.
But this is a diagram, so here I think this is more, it sort of explains a bit better, the cultural diversity, biological diversity, the cultural practice that depend on elements of biodiversity for their expression, so different cultures are dependent on biodiversity. So it's really showing this interdependence, and also how biodiversity is developed and maintained by cultural groups, and then obviously the ecosystem services, etc.
이걸 역시 도표가 아까 말씀드린 것 같이 사회적, 문화적 다양성과 그 다음에 생태적 다양성이 하나로 묶여져 있고 서로 영향을 주는 것에 대해서 관계를 보여주는 도표입니다.
So this is just another diagram showing here the biological diversity, cultural diversity, where we have the intangible heritage, tangible, and then here we have the ecological, let's say, engineering, the tangible and the low human impact on the landscapes. Obviously, to have more biodiversity, we need to have less impact on the landscapes.
이건 역시 영향을 주는 요소들을 보여주는 그런 다이어그램인데요. Biocultural diversity에 있는 것들이 아까 도표뿐만이 아니고 이번에는 문화유산 같은 것, 그리고 거기에는 실질적으로 볼 수 있는 그 tangible 또는 intangible 다 들어가 있고 그것뿐만이 아니고 engineering, 그리고 사람들이 사는 사회의 모습 같은 거, 특히 low human impact landscapes라고 하면은 우리가 자연한테 주는 영향 굉장히 적게 주는 그런 환경을 얘기하잖아요. 그것들이 어떻게 한 군데 모여 있는지 보여주는 그런 다이어그램입니다.
So this was I just looked at UNESCO World Heritage Sites, what are the different criteria, and then what I took here was I was looking really at the ones that would be relevant to the DMZ, which are the ones which are to do more with ecological and biological processes, and also talking about the natural habitats. and the biological diversity, because the idea was looking really at the landscape of the DMZ. Of course, as we'll see afterwards, there's also a lot of heritage sites that could be included, but if we're looking really at the band of the DMZ, then it would be these two that would be relevant.
유네스코 세계문화유산 조건 중에서 여러 가지가 있는데 그 중에서 우리나라 DMZ에 해당되는 조건이 이 두 개가 가장 상황이 맞는 것 같아서 두 개를 찝어보셨는데요. 특히 그 땅에 있어서는 그 안에 들어가 있는 요소들을 살펴보는 이 두 조항이 있습니다.
So I also looked at what were the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in North Korea and South Korea. So this is the list so far. There's two of them in North Korea, and
북한은 두 개.
these are the ones in South Korea. And this is just the mapping where you can see them, the World Heritage Sites. Here, where you can see them side by side. The reason is because one of the discussions was to look at, to discuss the DMZ as a World Heritage Site, which is why I did this research, because as we'll see afterwards, there is also the designation here of the Biosphere Reserve, which has already been applied for, and so they're two different things. The Biosphere Reserve is one thing, and the heritage is another, and they could of course be combined. I think that what we need to be doing now is to look at what is really relevant and how do we bring together all these initiatives.
이 자료를 보는 이유는 DMZ가 세계문화유산으로서 어떤 의미를 갖고 있는지, 어떤 자격을 갖고 있는지 좀 살펴보다 보니까 그런 프로젝트를 하다 보니까 이런 자료들을 쭉 보게 됐는데요. 그것뿐만 아니고 생물권 인정에 대해서는 이미 어느 정도 진행이 됐는데 그 부분에서도 문화유산과 생물권 인정도 서로 통하는 부분이 있는 것 같아서 비교하는 자료로서 충분히 의미가 있다고 생각이 돼서 이런 자료를 보고 있습니다.
And of course, for this to have a real meaning and impact, would need that the North Koreans would do a similar initiative, obviously, on the North Korean side with the same biosphere reserves. And I don't know if there's any work yet that's been done on that. Maybe somebody here knows more, but
여러분께서 아실지
Yeah.
모르겠지만 이 생물권 인정이 의미가 있기 위해서는 북한에서도 같은 수준의 연구가 있어야 되는데 북한께서는 모르시니까 혹시 알고 계시면은 알려달라고 하십니다.
And as I mentioned before, I think also that the 2-kilometer band obviously has a different status as well. So I think that might be considered differently than a biosphere reserve. It could be even a heritage site, as I was saying before. The 4 kilometers band on either side.
그리고 그 양쪽에 4km 지역이 있는 것도 양쪽에서 여겨지는 어떻게 여기고 어떻게 생각하는지조차 다른 스테이터스가 있을 수도 있고 한쪽에서는 생물권 인정으로 생각하고 있고 이슈를 한쪽에서는 세계문화유산의 이슈를 생각할 수 있기 때문에 양쪽에서 어떤 연구가 되고 있는지 아는 게 중요합니다.
So these are just from the report. So this is what I was saying, that this is a sort of special zone, obviously, which is now still controlled by the UN. And so it could be that these have biosphere. The other side, they also have biosphere, if in the future. But then maybe some of this part has a very special status and could become a heritage site because of its unique, as this border landscape. So that for me is what should be sort of discussed. UNESCO heritage, UNESCO biosphere.
지금 이 지역에서도 보면은 저렇게 얇은 4km 방향 같은 경우에는 이 밑에 지역과는 또 다르게 구분이 될 수 있는데 아래쪽에는 생물권 보존이 인정이 이미 되고 있지만 아무래도 저 지역은 더 사람들이 가지 않는 지역이기 때문에 그 지역은 문화유산으로 보존이 되든지 이쪽은 생물권이 되든지 해서 그런 이슈들도 앞으로 서로 얘기를 하고 해결해야 될 중요한 이슈 중에 하나입니다.
So this is one, so the same versions of the maps, and here with the topography, so you can see also the different.
여러 개 지도인데 아까 거는 지형이고 이거는 땅이 어떻게 구분되어 있는지.
So this one is actually the different types, but we don't have the legends, the different types of reserves here. There's also different, I don't have the legends here, but I have the report anyway. If anyone wants, I can send you the report. Huh? It's just for time, I was thinking I didn't do, but I do have the report in my computer, so if you want, I can send you those. But they're different kind of protected areas. Natural protected areas, heritage protected areas. There's a classification. It's a UNESCO classification. Yeah. So this was also something that I was interested in. There's something else which UNESCO has is transboundary heritage sites for peace. So that's another UNESCO designation. So I sort of looked into that because I think that's also what we're looking at here with the DMZ. And I just found one example here, which was between on the border between Turkey and Georgia. And here it's interesting because it's also biocultural hotspots, and because we were talking about biocultural diversity. So what I thought was interesting is to see, where they have these biological and cultural hotspots in these border areas.
이번에 볼 거는 유네스코에서 이 접경을 초월해서 어느 나라에 국한되지 않고 트랜스바운더리 그 유산 지역이거든요. 그래서 이번에 얘는 터키와 조지아 접경 부분입니다. 그래서 여기서도 보면은 핫스팟이라 그래서 뭔가 굉장히 많이 모여 있고 여러 가지 이런 다이버시티 지금 다양성에 대해서 얘기하고 있는데 생태적으로 문화적으로 굉장히 다양하게 모들이 많이 모여 있는 지역이라고 해서 핫스팟으로 보고 있을 수 있습니다.
So this is just a mapping of that area, and where they did this studies of the biocultural diversity in this border area. So here you can see the border areas. That's the zone that they were studying. So now we're going to talk about, as we mentioned, the multi-scale, and scale can also be spatial, but it can be also temporal at the time scale, the historical scale, and then even the institutional scale, because obviously we know to address all of these questions of the DMZ, it goes from the regional and even global institutions to the local municipalities and mayors and etc. So we always need these multi-scale approaches, and also different levels of biodiversity, whether it's going from genes to species to ecosystems and to landscape. And as I've seen recently, there's been a project for a seed bank in the DMZ. I don't know if some of you've heard about that. But so this idea, we're talking about seeds or genes, or so the biodiversity is really going at different scales. And then also the cultural diversity obviously has different levels: intercultural diversity or intracultural diversity, which is a difference between subcultures or different sectors of society, like men, women, different social classes. That's an intracultural diversity.
그리칭 박사님이 이제 건축가이시다 보니까 앞에 보면 이슈 오브 스케일에서 스케일을 굉장히 중요하게 생각하시더라고요. 그러니까 우리가 볼 적에 우리도 왜 조그만 단계 이렇게 크게 어떤 커뮤니티 단계에서 또는 인스티튜션 단계에서 소사이티 단계에서 한 것 같이 멀티 스케일 어프로치에서 한 어떻게 보면 레벨이라고도 볼 수 있는데 그 레벨뿐만이 아니고 모든 단계에서 한꺼번에 하는 모든 규모에서 하는 그런 어프로치를 중요하게 생각하는데요. 이 스케일이라고 할 적에는 공간적인 것도 있고 그다음에 시간적인 것도 스케일이 될 수가 있고 또 하나는 역사적 면에서 볼 수 있고 또 하나는 기관의 규모에 따라서도 스케일이 적용이 될 수 있는데 그래서 여기 바이오다이버시티 같은 경우에도 생태 다양성에서도 이렇게 아까 잠깐 얘기해 주셨는데 DMZ에 씨앗 은행이 있었거든요. 근데 그런 프로젝트 같이 좀 작은 것들 또는 더 큰 이코시스템이나 어떤 큰 랜드스케이프 단위로도 해당이 되고 그리고 이 문화적 이런 다이버시티도 마찬가지로 인터컬처럴이니까 문화와 문화 사이에 그런 다양성뿐만이 아니고 한 조그만 사회에서 한 문화 안에서도 있을 수 있는 그런 다양성도 여러 레벨에서 고려하는 것이 스케일로 지금 표현이 되고 있습니다.
I won't read all of this, but just we're looking at scale at the local and obviously, as I mentioned before, national, regional and international scales when we're looking at biocultural diversity. And obviously the time and historical contexts are also important. When we're thinking of the future of the DMZ, for example, we need to probably think of the future in 10 years, but also in 50 years. So there's also the time scale, which is very important.
그래서 스케일에 대해서 조금 더 설명을 하고 있는데요. 예를 들어서 국가적이거나 지역적이거나 인터내셔널이 되거나 시간에 있어서는 10년이 되거나 더 장기적으로 보거나 그럴 적에 스케일이 다 적용이 되고 있습니다.
So here it's a concept that I worked with, which is the buffer. So the DMZ is a buffer. It's a buffer between these two. It's a ceasefire line between opposing forces. But it's also something that protects. We know that in ecology we have what we call environmental buffers. And then in information technology, we also in computers we have what we call a memory buffer. So it sort of stores, temporarily stores data until the computer is ready to receive or process that data. So I was very interested in that because for me this the future that we're creating in any border zone or buffer zone, we're sort of creating the future memory of this zone. And it has this sort of, it's also a container of memory. So this is a concept of sort of transitioning from a military buffer zone to an environmental buffer, and that's also connecting a lot of existing, ecological spaces. It's also a laboratory of ecological planning and human reconciliation, reconnecting ecologies and communities, and then the idea of a landscape of memory, reconnecting to history and also a memorial to the victims, sort of creating a new history in a way.
그리고 하나의 중요한 컨셉 스케일뿐만이 아니고 이제 버퍼라는 건데요. 이 버퍼가 여러 가지 의미가 있는데 어떤 완충지나 완충 구조를 얘기하는데 밀리터리 단순하게 보면 이제 DMZ는 군사적인 양 대립하고 있는 그런 나라의 밀리터리 버퍼가 있는데 그것뿐만이 아니고 나중에는 이제 메모리 버퍼를 얘기하셨잖아요. 근데 우리가 미래를 위해서 어떤 역사적으로 기억을 만들어 어떤 추억이나 이런 한 시대에 대한 기억을 만들고 있는데 그것을 갖다가 잠깐 어떤 식으로 이걸 만들 건지에 대해서 잠깐 시간을 갖는 그런 메모리 버퍼를 볼 수 있습니다.
So here you can see this is Cyprus and it's the military buffer zone with the different sectors and the different crossing points here. So this is really the military map, and then here I took the map with all the sort of the rivers or the winter rivers, and these are the sort of national parks. And this is actually the British military zone here. But the idea is to show really how the buffer in Cyprus also has a potential to connect, existing sort of green and protecting areas. So it's this really the transition from this to this.
자, 이거는 사이프러스의 예인데요. 첫 번째는 보면 아주 단순하게 지도에서 이 버퍼도 밀리터리 버퍼존을 보여주고 있죠. 그래서 이렇게 접경 지역을 갖다 건너갈 수 있는 포인트들도 표시가 되어 있는데 아래를 보면 그것뿐만이 아니고 거기서 강도 나와 있고 그 다음에 영국군의 군사기지도 나와 있고 한데 그것들이 접경 지역을 갖다가 이렇게 이렇게 서로 연결이 되면서 밀리터리 버퍼 존이 단순하게 밀리터리 버퍼가 아니고 그 메모리 랜드스케이프 오브 어떤 추억이나 이 역사적인 기억에 대한 그런 랜드스케이프이 될 수도 있고 그 다음에 여기서 보면 이제 어떤 화해 그리고 여러 가지 의미를 갖는 그런 버퍼 지역으로 탈바꿈하고 있는 그런 과정을 보여주고 있습니다.
So here we see the sort of similarity with the buffer zone in Korea. So this was a mapping with the rivers also in this forest area. Just to show that there's a similar type, even if it's of course there's many differences as well, but sort of from an approach and a landscape point of view. So what I was interested in looking at as well was looking at what is the kind of framework we can work with, and the idea that obviously as we saw before there's a lot of flows, there's still rivers that flow. There's flyways, there's animals, there's birds that fly, there's driftways in the water, there's species that fly, and the rivers and lakes, and the infrastructure, of course. We know there's still infrastructure that passes. And there's also the linear, the backbone, then this is, as we saw in the German Green Belt, this is the patrol path. This is this linear element that goes all along the DMZ, and it could be also that this new habitat corridor that's created. And then there's the core nodes, so either the biodiversity hotspots, or it could be settlements, or they can also be memorial, special memorial hotspots, or cultural or archaeological hotspots. So when we talk about archaeology here, we could talk obviously about ancient archaeology, but there's also a concept of the archaeology of conflict. So we know that these places where these areas where there's conflict has happened sort of become also military archaeological spaces. And then the events. So this could be that there's events that happen, or cultural events, or educative events. So these are more sort of temporary things that can happen.
우선 이 지역을 볼 적에 그 변화가 있을 수 있는 변화를 이 지역이 변화하는 데 있어서 영향을 줄 수 있는 그런 요소들을 보면은요, 크게 어떤 배경 그 안에 들어가는 요소들을 보면은 첫 번째는 movement, 실질적으로 동물들이나 야생 동물들이 움직이는 그런 것들이 있고요. 두 번째는 실질적으로 있는 커다란 군사적 기물들이 있겠고, 그 다음에는 스페이스, 공간적인 것들이 있어서 그 안에 있는 활동들, 예를 들어서 문화적이거나 사람들이 모여서 할 수 있는 그런 활동들이 있고, 그 다음엔 역사적으로 있었던, 지금 현재는 있지 않지만 분명히 그 지역에 특색을 주고 어떤 색깔을 줄 수 있는 그런 어떤 이벤트들도 있는데요. 지금 박사님께서는 좀 특이하게 archaeology라는 단어를 쓰시거든요. 근데 일반적으로 고고학으로 많이 쓰고 있는데, 어떤 지역에 있는 이거를 통틀어서 얘기하는 것을 이 고고학적 유물과 가지고 있는 그 어떤 기억들, 실질적인 것들, 그러니까 tangible한 거랑 intangible한 걸 다 합쳐가지고 archaeology라는 표현을 지금 쓰고 계십니다.
Okay, so how are we doing for time? I'm just wondering, just to know how I can. I mean,
It's a small group, so I think. Yeah, it's up to you. I think we're
okay, everyone's doing good.
We'll still do that. You can take a break if you like.
No, it's okay. I'm fine. Yeah, I just. Okay.
You haven't lost us. You're all
Okay, good. So these are just general maps, but just looking at the the global of all these disputed boundaries, borders, and this is all the peacekeeping forces, of course, that we also have that are important in these spaces. I always think it's interesting to look at military expenditure, because obviously that's also related to the conflict. So these are just big maps, and here this is just a mapping of the sort of spaces that I've been looking at. The Korean demilitarized zone, the Cyprus Green Line, obviously the fence that's now being built in America and Mexico. And this is a map that I designed for my PhD, and what I wanted to show here was that we have historical barriers. I'm not sure if you can read it, but here you can see the Iron Curtain. Here you can see this is actually the Roman lines. This was the Roman walls. Some of them actually built walls. There's the Great Wall of China. This is the one that's now being built. So in orange, they're the ones that are actually existing or being built, and the white ones are walls that are no longer, that have fallen. So the idea is to give this long view of history, and that we know that eventually the walls will all fall. I mean, even if we think it's never going to happen, it's like the Berlin Wall. No one thought it was going to fall, but now it's 30 years since it fell. And I was actually in Berlin the day the wall fell, because I was preparing to do my work for my diploma, and everyone was saying, "You're crazy," And the day I was there, the wall fell. So it's something that I've really experienced. Yes, yeah.
이거는 이 지도는 이렇게 조금 보기는 어렵지만 박사님께서 박사학위 딸 적에 했던 그 지도인데요. 하얀 부분은 어떤 지금 이 barrier, 벽을 보여주는 건데, 역사적으로 예전에 있었지만 현재는 없었던 그런 벽이죠. 예를 들어서 Great Wall, 만리장성도 나와 있고, 지금은 없어진 독일의 Berlin Wall도 나와 있고, 그리고 주황색으로 있는 부분들은 현재 지어지거나 있는 그런 벽들, barrier들을 보여주고 있습니다. 그래서 지금 단순히 이렇게 누적된 인간들의 역사에 나와 있는 그런 접경 그리고 벽들을 보여주는 그런 지도입니다.
And so this is to sort of justify the fact that, you know, we have to design and plan for the future, especially as architects and planners, and we have to plan also far ahead. As a planner, we have to plan for the next, you know, something that maybe will happen in 50 years or even beyond.
이런 스케일을 보는 게 의미가 있는 게 건축가 그렇게 도시 계획자로서 앞을 멀리 내다보고 그 역사를 갖다가 되돌아볼 적에도 단순히 짧은 역사가 아니고 길게 되돌아보는 것이 의미가 있습니다.
And so that's why these are the two areas, you know, sort of buffers that I've been interested in thinking about and designing. And this is just a picture of once I was here for a conference and we went to visit, I can't remember the name of this observatory, but we were, you know, so we were thinking about, here we're thinking about how we're going to redesign the buffer zone, yeah. And here, this is actually when they're designing how they're going to build the wall in Israel. You know, so it's this opposition between how people are designing the wall and how we're designing after the future of the peace park. You know, so it's really putting these things in, and you know, they're going on at the same time. You know, in different parts of the world. Yeah. So these are just a few case studies that I had looked at, and what I was interested in seeing, you know, what are the remains of these borders.
이번에 볼 거는 이런 접경 지역에 대해서 그 흔적 같은 걸 보려고 합니다.
And so this is the Hadrian's Wall, and you can see that it's actually a trail where you can walk along, and there's different parts, you know, different areas where there's actually an atlas that's been done here, and you can see, yes, yeah, that's Hadrian's Wall. And here you can see all the different, you know, remains, and you can actually, there's a trail where you can actually, you know, walk along there.
지금 헤이드랜 워 같은 경우는 영국 저 위쪽에 나와 있는데
음.
실질적으로 어떤 구조물들이 나와 있고 뭐가 있는지를 살펴보는 건데요. 이렇게 현재로는 이렇게 걸어갈 수 있게 트레일이 있고 그다음에 약간 군사적인 그런 흔적들이 남아 있는 게 이 헤이드랜 월의 실질적인 구조예요.
And this is the Great Wall of China. What was interesting there is, of course, it's a tourist area, but also they have a marathon. So I thought that was really interesting. It's because of its linear form. It's, you know, it's very good for having marathons. This is the Atlantic Wall. Maybe not as well known, but it has a lot of these fortresses that are still left on the sea. Yeah.
잘 알려지지 않지만은 저 해안선을 쭉 따라서 이런 요새들이 쭉 있는 그 라인을 갖다 지금 지도에서 보여주고 있습니다.
And quite interesting, actually, architecturally.
건축적으로도 굉장히 흥미롭고 이름은 Atlantic Wall이라고 그 해안선을 따라 있어요.
And this is the German green belt. And actually, when this map here. They said this was actually the longest study of biodiversity they'd ever did, because they studied the biodiversity in the whole of Germany, the whole length of the Iron Curtain. So it was really interesting from a sort of scientific study point of view of studying biodiversity. And there you can see obviously the difference. These are the cultivated fields, and then this was left, you know, for nature. And interestingly enough, when the Iron Curtain fell, there was nothing green. It's not like it's the opposite from the DMZ. In fact, it was sand, because they took away anything that grew, because they wanted to be able to, they had walls and they had sand in between. So it was the opposite. In fact, the nature just emerged afterwards. But what was interesting is probably on both sides there was quite a lot of nature and biodiversity, because the edges were not developed.
지금은 독일의 그린벨트 같은 경우인데요. 우리나라 DMZ와는 반대로 그 벽과 벽 사이에 관리하기 편하게 모래가 있었는데 지금은 시간이 흐르다 보니까 그게 이제 많이 이런 모양으로 바뀌었고, 또 하나는 이 프로젝트가 의미가 있는 게 규모적으로는 가장 크고 가장 이렇게 지역이 그러니까 긴 그런 바이오다이버시티, 생태 다양성에 대한 그런 프로젝트였다고 합니다.
And obviously the Korean demilitarized zone, so I won't explain that one. And Mexico defense, I mean, this is, you know, the project, or some of it is already in the process of being built. You can
현재
see
진행되고 있는
where it goes
미국과
out into the sea.
멕시코 사이의 벽이죠. 트럼프가 시작한
Trump's big project. Yeah. And this is also in Israel, Palestine also. The wall. So here I'm just going back to this mapping, as we said. It was the longest biological inventory in the history of German nature conservation. It was 1,400 kilometers of research, so it's quite impressive to see the work that they did. This is interesting because this was supported by Mikhail Gorbachev, and so obviously he was one of the people who, you know, allowed for the fall of the Iron Curtain. And the idea there was, how did we finance this? And I thought this was interesting. What they did is they had what they called green shares. So people could become shareholders of the green belt. You know, so because of course you say, how do you finance, or how can you maybe buy the land? Some of the land is private. So there was this idea of having the shareholders of the green belt. And this is the image we saw before of the patrol path here. And this is Michael Kromer. He's a member of the European Parliament, and he was one of the supporters. He was he loved bike riding, so he biked all along the Iron Curtain, and they made this guide of, being able to ride along the Iron Curtain.
지금 이 1,400km에 달하는 굉장히 규모가 가장 큰 프로젝트였다고 말씀을 드렸는데요. 이 지역 내 생태 다양성과 보존을 위해서 재정적으로 돈이 많이 드는데, 그래서 두 분이 지원하는 두 분이 소개가 되는데, 하나는 예전 미카엘 고르바초프 같은 경우에는 그분도 그 지역 내 그린벨트에 대한 그 쉐어를 통해서 일종 지분을 가질 수 있는데, 그런 것을 통해서 이제 재정적인 것을 마련을 했고, 두 번째 분 같은 경우는 마이클 크레머라고 유로피언 파르멘트에서 이분도 서포터로 활동을 많이 하셨다고 합니다.
So what's interesting is he was German and a member of the Green Party, so with links to Joseph Beuys. So we have the link to Joseph Beuys. So this is along the Iron Curtain, and it's for the veterans of the Soviet-Finnish War. And what's interesting here is just to show that, we can have memorials and monuments, but they don't necessarily have to be. We tend to see monuments, memorials often as very, sort of military or people, whereas here the idea is that it can be very much more like a land art or a landscape, or very much like an artistic intervention and a landscape intervention rather than a memorial. And what's also very important here is the idea that we're commemorating the people on both sides who passed away, because often with the memorials you have a memorial on one side for the people for one side and one on the other, whereas here I think what's important when we're doing this commemoration is commemorating all the victims as well.
이제 일반적으로 기념 전쟁에 관련된 기념관을 볼 때는 한쪽만 적이다 보니까 한쪽만 하는 경우가 많은데, 이런 같은 이 경우에는 양쪽을 다 한꺼번에 한 자리에 모아 있고, 또 뿐만 아니고 어떤 이 구조물이나 사람의 구조물이나 사람의 포커스를 두는 반면에, 이번엔 랜드스케이프에 포커스를 둬가지고 좀 친지형적인 그런 구조물을 통해서 모니먼트를 만들게 좀 특이하다고 합니다.
So this is an example in Berlin. This is just some images I took about, as I said before, it was all sand, and then nature started to take over. So you see these beautiful landscapes of biodiversity in Berlin. Do you want to translate that?
네, 여기는
Yes.
그 버린 월 자리였는데, 아까 그 중간에 모래가 있었다고 그랬는데, 시간이 흐르다 보니까 이렇게 식물들이 자라서 이렇게 친환경적이고 좀 우리가 생각했던 버린 월과는 다른 그런 모습을 하고 있습니다.
This is in the center of Berlin, and one thing I understood in Berlin when I did my work on Berlin was that once there's a reunification, the forces of economy and real estate go very, very fast. So in the center of Berlin, they erased the wall because they sold the land, and all they started rebuilding very, very quickly. So the wall disappeared, and then the tourists were saying, where's the wall? So the city had to put a line to show where the wall was.
그래서 버린 월이 길다 보니까 저렇게 조금 외곽 지역에는 이렇게 나무들이 자라고 있는데, 버린 시내 같은 경우에는 자연보다는 이코노미가 이겼죠. 그래서 다 흔적도 사라지고 아무것도 없고 새로운 도시가 됐는데, 사람들이 이제 어떤 관광적인 목적에서 찾다 보니까 이렇게 요거 하나 남은 게 버린 월의 흔적입니다.
And my idea was that if this space is to serve an ecological purpose and a purpose of memory, then we have to have a plan before there is a reunification or solution, because otherwise the economy, the economic forces will always go very, very fast, and it's very hard to negotiate for ecology and memory. So this is what I learned from working on Berlin.
베를린 케이스를 통해서 이제 배운 것 중에 하나가 이런 화합이나 reconciliation이 있을 적에는 그 전에 어떻게 할지를 미리 계획해 놓지 않으면 그냥 경제적인 이 돈에 관한 세력들이 너무 세기 때문에 그 상황에서 협상을 해가지고 우리는 메모리가 중요하다, 생태가 중요하다 해서 이길 수가 없기 때문에 이런 것들을 미리 장기적으로 플래닝을 미리 시작하는 게 맞다고 이 케이스를 통해서 배운 것입니다.
So this was my proposal. This is in red, the wall, and it was linking actually. This is the Tiergarten, different parks and cemeteries, etc. So the idea that it could be a connector of landscapes and ecological belt, a heritage trail, a network for soft mobility, a landscape of memory, and then also new institutions for the reunified Germany.
이거는 박사님이 제안하신 프로젝트, 멀린월을 이렇게 가보자 하는 프로젝트인데요. 이 지역이 여러 가지 의미를 가지고 있는데 이것 6가지 나열된 것들이 이 지역의 기능들, 역할들을 보여주고 있습니다.
So this was also the project that I drew, and there was also a canal. So what I did is, this idea of the scar is, I made a canal from the river here. So you could keep in negative this idea of the wall, and then you had all these bridges which were stitching together the city. This was East Berlin and then West Berlin. And then here we had a documentation center, and here there was a memorial, a lake, etc.
예. 그리고 지금 그 베를린
이거는 넣으셔도 될 것 같아요.
Sorry? Is everything okay?
from now on.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Can we take a short break?
Oh, we can, sure.
잠깐
We can have a break.
정도 쉬시고.
한 5분 정도. 잠깐.
Sure, sure.
아니면 직접 하셔도 될 것 같아요.
5 minutes break.
Thank you so much for the
그럼
translation.
여기 번역 통 빨리 해봐요. 못 들었잖아요.
어떤 거요? 이거요?
지금
이거 한 거는 집에 보시면 돼요. 이거는 있으면 정독이랑 서독인데 그 urban planning 도시 계획한 걸 갖다 프로포즈를 내신 거거든요. 근데 아까 말씀하셨던 그런 6가지 역할을 하자고 그랬잖아요. 특히 이분, 그러니까 박사님께서 강조하시는 거는 메모리 역할을 하자는 것이 굉장히 중요하다고 하시더라고요. 아니면은 돈에 의해서 사람들이 다 땅을 사가 버리니까 요거 하나만 남는 건데, 그래서 이렇게 보존을 해가지고 그리고 이런 브리지들이 이렇게 링크하는 역할을 하고 건물들조차도 그 어떤 리서치 센터, 이 역사적으로 있었던 일들을 갖다가 계속 보존할 수 있는 그런 기관들, 그리고 사람들이 양쪽에서도 모일 수 있는 그런 메모리를 굉장히 중요하게 여기시더라고요. 그래서 메모리얼 레이크 같은 거를 포함하는 이렇게 한 띠를 만드는 게 제안하신 프로젝트예요. Urban Planning Project.
And this was actually where all the SS ruins were. So the idea was to leave the ruins and put water over them. So we keep the ruins but have a lake. And you could actually take the water away if you want to show the ruins. Yeah. But the idea was to keep the traces there.
그래서 있었던 흔적들을 다 보존하는 그런 디자인을 갖다가 지금 강조하고 계세요.
Okay.
So your proposal is accepted or?
No, it was.
이게
Well, I did it in 1989. And then, as I said, they had already, they had sold this land here before the reunification. So they actually sold it to Sony and Daimler-Benz before the reunification. And then they bought it actually, because I wrote all about this in my master's, and then they bought it for a price which was actually below, because I have the maps of all the real estate here during the wall and then after the fall of the wall. And this was the center of the city, so this was the most expensive real estate. It went from like basically nothing to the most expensive real estate.
How come they were able to buy it before the reunification?
Well, because it was some problem of political, I would say, I don't know how you call it, lobbying or
Right.
because what happened is
It was a bit
well, it was very fishy, and actually, what happened is that because they have the Green Party, and they're very active in Berlin, so they actually took them to the European Court of Justice, the European Court, maybe not Justice, but they went to the European Court, and they had to actually then pay the difference. So a lot of people don't know this story, but so the corporations were actually taken.
So it was a bargain at
Because,
first, but
but they said, because people said this, why are we paying top prices to build accommodation, and these corporations get this land at this price? It should never have been sold.
yeah, and they're rich anyway.
They are exactly, and it should never have been sold. And they're the only ones who were allowed to build towers, because all the rest was low rise. So the only towers you see now are these towers. So it's quite interesting when you see, how economy, corporations, real estate dominated, the whole discussion and the whole reconstruction. Yeah. So yeah.
I majored in architecture.
Huh?
I majored in architecture.
Oh,
Although I don't practice.
amazing.
I graduated from University of Sydney.
Oh, really? Oh, amazing. Sydney. Oh, fantastic.
So all those people, Zaha Hadid and
Oh,
all those names, yeah, they rang a bell.
amazing. Oh, fantastic.
So I find all this very interesting.
Yeah. Well, you have a nice Zaha building here, huh? I didn't have time to see it this time, but last time it was just open when I came last time. I went to visit. It was really quite beautiful. It's quite nice. Ah, so
I
yeah.
requested the break because I was losing concentration. So
No, I was seeing it. It's very long. I'm sorry.
It's so very
You see, I didn't think about that there would be translation. Which is why I made long because I said
No, but
I
it's
said I'm going to be
fascinating,
speaking for an hour. Then so I thought that but it's fine. As long as everyone's. Plus, if it's too long at the end, there's lots of slides. I'm not going to really explain that much. We can skip stuff.
이거 진짜 맛있어. Are you having the same one?
Which one is?
Can I get you one of that?
No, I started this one. It's very nice. You can taste it too. It's very good.
If you haven't tried this one too.
What is it?
It's got a tang to it. I think the coating on the outside is yogurt based.
Oh,
Not just sugar, it's very tangy.
they're very good. This one's nice.
I might have this.
Well, thank you for the translation. So you didn't go in architecture. What did you?
I worked for an architect for about a year and a half, and then after that I went into broadcasting. I found it to be a lot easier than architecture. A lot less work. And I never really got adjusted to CAD.
Yeah.
When I was just starting out, it was all pencil and desk.
Oh yeah, this was all drawn by hand.
Yeah. So
If you're sitting in front of a computer doing CAD, it's not very.
So trace paper and all that, that's how I started out. But in my third year, everything went over to CAD and I started learning CAD, but I never really got the hang of it. I was falling asleep all the time.
뭐 하나 했어요?
You spent your time in the computer. I'm just going to use the bathroom and get some.
아 맞다, 사인을 받아야죠.
이렇게 분석들을 만들어낸다는 게 그러니까 우리가 학술이 지구와사람 학술이 앞으로 해야 될 과제가 저런 거예요. 술을 만들어내는 거. 프레임.
이게 그러니까요. 말 잘 짓고 그거 참 중요하더라고요.
굉장히 중요해요.
네,
아까
도식화하고
맨 앞에 자연의 왕국을 이렇게 전해왔다는 게
이
굉장한
시대다
분석이에요.
이 시대다 뭐 그런 거.
굉장한 분석이야. 내가
남들이 인용하게
거기서 맥혀갖고 한 몇 년을 고민하다가 그 피플 앤 네이처를 넘어간다는 거 굉장한 거예요. 네이처 폴 피플 다음에 뭐냐가 굉장히 쉽지가 않은 문제인데 피플 앤 네이처. 그리고 지구과학도 거기에 해당할 수 있는 거고 같이 가자는 거니까. 참 공부 잘하시네요. 저 용어 만들고
그러니까 개념화하는
그게
게
실력이 돼요.
네.
깊이가 있어야 나오죠.
그래 더 있어 보이지.
어떤 분은 그냥 이렇게 뭐랄까 개념 없이 훌륭한 건축인데 이분은 아카데믹한 거와 그 어떤 문화적 상상 이걸 다
그래서 초반에는 이 양반이 지금 원전공을 했길래 이렇게 얘기를 하시나 그러고 있었는데 근데
전공이 딱히 건축학인가? 그것도
네,
아니고
건축하셨어요.
김구원 선생님도
네.
건축하시잖아요.
네.
그러세요?
근데 전혀 도움이 안 되고 있어요.
호주에서 건축학
지금 얘기 꺼내기 되게
졸업하고
민망해요.
서울대
서울대
건축
대학원 건축학.
대학원을
네, 중퇴.
원래 세계적인 거장들은 어떻게
더 이상 배울 게 없다.
와우.
이게 디자인 오브 어버니즘인데 이게 이제 도시 건축학인가요?
그렇죠.
어벌 플래닝이요?
보니까
어버니즘이
그 박사님과 디자인 오브 어버니즘.
네, 맞아요.
도시
어벌
디자인.
디자인이라고 하고 디자인
네,
오브 어버니즘이라고 하는데
도시 계획 뭐 그런 거
네, 약간 스케일
네.
크게 하는 거를 그렇게 얘기하는데 되게 특이한 게 그 건축학을 배우다 보면은 진짜 다 배워요. 공간 심리학, 사회학, 자연에 대한 거 뭐 안 배우는 게 없어요. 그리고
수학.
의외로 엔지니어링이나 그런 거는 맡겨요. 그러니까 기초적인 것만 배우고 나중에 어차피 자세한 거는 계산을 해야 되니까 뭐 예를 들어서 어디가 무겁고 어디가 가볍고 그런 정도만 하는데 이분은 좀 특이한 게 또 경제도 이렇게 많이 아시는 것 같아요. 예를 들어서 아까 잠깐 자리 비우셨으니까 설명을 할 텐데 이제 이런 도시 계획이 있으면 프로포즈를 많이 내잖아요. 그래서 전 세계적으로 유명한 데는 아마 다 낼 거예요. 그래서 이분도 내셨는데 당연히 안 됐죠. 이게 이렇게 그거를 받아들이기는 쉽지가 않거든요. 아이디어스로는 좋지만. 근데 지금 얘기를 하시면서 이 포츠다머 플랫스 있는 쪽에는 이게 여기만 유일하게 고층 건물
회담했던 데 아니에요? 그리고?
그런가 봐요. 그 플라자가 플랫스 같은데 저쪽만 고층 건물도 있고 나머지는 현재 다 저층 건물인데 경제의 주도권 때문에 돈에 의해서 이렇게 세계적으로 큰 스케일로 한 계획이 딱 실행되기가 거의 불가능하대요. 그리고 좀 특이했던 거는 이쪽에 있었던 땅이 그 동서 그 reunification 되기 전에 통일되기 전에 이미 그 땅은 어떤 기업한테 팔렸다고 그러더라고요. What was the company that bought the land? Was it Sony?
There was Sony, Diamond Bands, and I think
아깝게 나갔다.
그래서 근데 저기가 지금 가장 비싼 땅인데 거기서 헐값에 샀었대요. 그러니까 약간 뭔가 좀 약간의 뭐 안전 비리 같은 게 있었던 거죠. 그러니까 돈에 의해서 이게 찢어지기 때문에 이게 이렇게 한 대 되기서는 그 미리 해야 되고 그 돈의 힘에 굴하지 않으려면은 스케일이 크고 안 그러면 이런 게 들어갈 수가 없고 다 산산조각이 난다고 얘기를
다시
하시더라고요.
가기 전에.
강의를 듣고
And there used to be about 160 parcels here, you see, different parcels.
조그만 집은 땅 단위를
And then they made them into just 3 parcels.
다 합쳐가지고 하나로 한 거예요.
So only the big corporations could buy it.
왜냐면 그게
You know,
땅덩어리가 커지면
before it would have, they could have left the parcels and had more diversity.
파슬이 그 머틀 얘기하는 거예요. 땅 단.
저 왼쪽 위에 빨간색 거기는 약간 그 SS라고 그 하잖아요. 그 나치 찌대
아, 라이시타그요?
그
Yes, the
Ah,
Reichstag
yes.
is here. Yes,
That's it.
yes. And the Brandenburg Tor, this is
브랜드.
checkpoint Chinese.
Very interesting. I explained
Oh, okay.
everything they told me because
Oh,
I found
yes.
it really fascinating and everybody loved it
Oh,
too.
Okay, so
When you're ready.
so that's interesting because it's the 30 years of reunification. So that's one of the stories of the reunification and the forces of real estate, you know.
네, 통일의 비하인드 스토리죠. 부동산 이야기요.
그러니까 우리도 제주도에 부동산 있잖아요.
그럼
그 얘기가 갑자기 I said everybody loves stories about real estate. Whether it's Berlin, it's not related to us, but we still love hearing about it.
So this is an interesting project because here, this is East Berlin and West Berlin, and here this is a project where the inhabitants, because there was very little green space, it's a very dense area, they had no parks. So this was another bottoms-up initiative with also some artists and inhabitants on both sides, and then they went to the city and they said, we want to make a park here. So this is one of the places where they made the Mauer Park, and it's very, very vibrant place if you go there. It's near Prenzlauer Berg, if you know Berlin, and it's a very vibrant park.
이거는 berlin에 있는 다른 건축 프로젝트 중에 하나인데요. 이거는 지금 bottoms-up이라는 표현을 쓰고 있는데 위에서 정부에서 실행을 한 게 아니고 사람들이 자기들이 힘을 모아서 이렇게 자발적으로 해서 올라가는 그런 프로젝트를 얘기하는데 거주하는 사람들이 이런 녹색 지역이 없다 그래가지고 이런 공원을 만들자 해서 결국은 만들어진 그런 케이스입니다.
This is an interesting community. This is an area, so here you can see what it was like, the water, it was all sand and this is actually a community that were living in caravans, and they used to live beside the wall because it was very interesting actually when I went the first time to West Berlin. There was the wall and there was a line of caravans on the west side. And I went just talked to some of these people. One of them offered me tea, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he said to me, "Well, actually, in West Berlin, we're not allowed to live in a caravan, and the wall is built 3 meters from the actual political border. So this is the border, and the wall is here, and the caravans were in that space because." They were not allowed to live in caravans in Berlin West, so they were on this strip of land which was part of Berlin East. So it was really interesting how they came around that. And then when the wall came down, they moved to this area. I'll let you translate.
이거는 이제 서독에서는 캐러밴에 사는 게 불법이거든요. 그렇다 보니까 실질적으로 이 berlin wall가 그 보더에는 3m. Did you say 33 meters?
3 meters.
3m라는 아주 작은 이렇게 공간 차이가 있는 거예요. 실질적으로 정책적으로 나누는 선이랑 그 berlin wall이 있는 거랑요. 그래서 그 3m 안에 살면은 거기가 서독이 아니고 동독인 거예요. 그러니까 불법이 아닌 거죠. 그래서 이분들은 캐러밴에 사는 사람들이 거기서 거주했었는데 이제 berlin wall이 없어지고 나서는 갈 데가 없다 보니까 이렇게 자기들만의 커뮤니티를 다시 꾸며서 이 지역에서 살게 됐습니다.
So then they moved to this area. And there they started to make this really autonomous ecological community, and they're using what they call EM technologies, which was developed in Japan, effective microorganisms. So it's this idea where there's 80 species of microorganisms that live together in balance, and it's this kind of symbiosis. So they were using also solar energy, etc. So it was a kind of an experimental living area.
이분들이 이제 구성한 사회를 얘기하는 건데요. 일본의 히가 박사님이 만드는 Effective Microorganism이라는 80개 종의 마이크로오르니즘들이 있고 그다음에 굉장히 어떻게 보면 제가 느끼는 히피 같은 그런 생활을 하신 것 같아요. Solar energy도 쓰고 I just explained that there are communities, something like it.
Yes.
Community that
Maybe
be
sort of alternative living. Yeah. Yes.
그래서 어떤 대안을 가지고 그런 라이프스타일을 가진 그런 사회를 구성했다고 합니다.
So this is an area in the center of Berlin as well that was not developed because, of course, Berlin had a boom, and then, buildings, things stopped because, there was a real estate sort of dropped, and they had too many offices and things. And so what was interesting is that this area in the center of the city then became a sort of a sculpture park, a temporary sculpture park.
이거는 시내 지역인데도 경제가 오락가락 하잖아요. 그래서 굉장히 활성화됐다가 떨어지고 그다음 가격이 떨어지고 그래서 한 시내에 있음에도 불구하고 개발이 전혀 안 된 그런 지역인데 나중에는 조각공원이 되었습니다.
So as you know, I'm not in real estate, I'm an urbanist, and so I sometimes think it's good when there's a kind of a recession from real estate because it allows other things to happen in the city. So, or it sometimes slows down the developments, and so this is quite interesting to see what developed here.
그래서 부동산 개발자가 아니고 건축가 입장에서 볼 적에는 이렇게 부동산 가격이 떨어지는 게 굉장히 좋은 것 같습니다. 왜냐하면 이렇게 평소에는 돈이 가져갈 그런 땅들을 좀 다양하게 사용할 수 있는 그런 기회가 생기기 때문이에요.
So now we're going to look at Cyprus. This was something I organized for the 20 years of German Unity. This was 10 years ago. In Cyprus, it was with the ambassador of of the German embassy there, and I presented actually the film about the German Greenbelt to show them in Cyprus, you know, what they could do with the buffer zone.
이건 10년 전에 박사님이 사이프러스 가셨을 적에 독일에 있었던 케이스 스터디를 그쪽에 보여줌으로 해서 이렇게 바뀔 수도 있고 독일의 케이스도 참고하면 좋을 것 같다고 그때 하신 프레젠테이션입니다.
So this is Cyprus here, and I think the dynamic is not working, so I'll just keep going. But anyway, normally that ball shows you, but this is, I think this is a PDF, maybe it's not that one. But so you can see here, this thing should normally move, and you can see the buffer zone here.
I see. 그게 사이프러스 버퍼 존이라고 하죠. 노란색이 일반적으로 움직이는데 지금 연한 선을 보이시죠?
And here I'm just showing sort of this idea of the different scales. So you can see here the regional, where you have the Middle East, Turkey and Greece, because Turkey and Greece were, of course, very involved in all of this conflict and in, you know, the peacekeeping and etc. Then you see the island. Then you see the scale of the whole buffer zone. Then these are the different districts here. Then you have the urban area of Nicosia. And then you have the walled city. There's still a walled city in the middle of the island. And then you have all the different parcels of the city. So it means that we're really looking at it from all of these different scales.
이런 시각은 지금 도시계획과의 시각으로 볼 수 있는데 아까 이 스케일의 중요성에서 얘기하셨잖아요. 그래서 멀티 스케일 어프로치에서 여러 가지 스케일을 통해서 접근하는 방법인데 아까 나왔던 지도를 보면은 좀 단순하게 부동산 입장에서 볼 때 땅들이 어떻게 나눠지는지 그다음에 굉장히 멀리서 크게 보는 그런 지역을 다양한 시각에서 보고 있습니다.
So this was a map actually what they called the territorial adjustments when they had the Annan plan in 2004. It was a peace plan by Kofi Annan. And they had territorial adjustments because they said, well, we're going to have a bi-zonal federation with the north and the south. It will be a federation, but we will give some, there will be exchanges of some territory. Above, you can see the scenarios that I've started developing here from a natural marine reserves, because there are these endangered monk seals here. Then the copper mines, the mouflon reserves, these are endangered species, organic farming, ecotourism, eco-museums. The old airport, which would be a new bi-communal campus. The old city, where there would be a Green Line a garden of forgiveness, the museums of memory, archaeological villages, then wetland reservoirs, and then eco-city and eco-park at the end. So these are the different scenarios along the green belt.
이거는 이제 사이프러스 경우인데요. 2004년에 커피 아난에 의해서 주도됐기 때문에 아난 플랜이라고도 하는데 남북이 지금 함께 어떤 지역을 관리하면서 그 중요한 지역들 그리고 중요한 성격들을 갖다가 엘리멘트 요소들을 갖다가 분석해 놓은 지도입니다.
So here you can see the walled city. So what's really interesting in Cyprus and in Nicosia is that you have this perfectly walled city, and the buffer zone actually goes through the center of the city, and then it gets obviously very wide. Here we have the airport, the old airport. So that's the larger part of the city, and that's the historic city, and then that's the larger part of the city.
지도를 보면은 버퍼존이 이렇게 얇아지기도 하고 두꺼워지기도 하는데 저쪽은 옛날 공항 자리고 특이한 게 그 버퍼존이 그 성을 가지고 있는 우리나라 같이 이렇게 남대문 같이 이렇게 4개 월드 시티를 가운데를 지나가고 있거든요. 그래서 빨간색이 대문들이 있는 그거 뭐라 그러죠? 월드 시티가 도성 벽이 있는 옛날이죠. 그래서 그것을 가운데를 뚫고 지나가고 있습니다.
So here we have the walled city, which has also a green area around it, and then here you can see the buffer zone in the middle of the city,
이거는 확대해 놓은 거죠.
separating north and south. And here we have actually the parcels. As I said, there's also the parcels. So these are each one is a building here. And what's interesting now is there's a new identity, because in fact the United Nations troops, which are patrolling this area, they give their own sort of names to these spaces. So in a way you've got, when we're talking about identity and culture, we kind of have this new culture that's brought by the United Nations forces, which give all these new names to the places. And for me that's an interesting part of even the memory and the heritage.
버퍼존이 성곽 내에서 어떻게 나눠져 있는지 좀 이제 자세히 보는 건데요. 이 지역의 땅이 어떻게 사용되고 있는지도 보이고, 또 하나는 이렇게 새로운 프로젝트를 통해서 이제 유엔의 영향력이 이 지역에 대해서도 갖게 되었는데, 오면서 이름도 바꾸고, 이름을 바꾸게 되다 보면 어떤 문화적인 성격이나 용도도 바뀌게 되는데, 도시 계획자 입장에서는 그런 이름을 붙이는 것도 굉장히 중요하고 의미 있다고 생각된다고 합니다.
So this is a project that I started to develop a few years ago because I was interested to try and find a tool where you could cooperate across these borders. Because, for example, in Cyprus, officially, there's some NGOs that collaborate, but officially, for example, an official state university in the south cannot collaborate with a university in the north. So any collaboration happens with NGOs. And so this was the idea of coming up with a tool for designing these plans, designing the future. And how I came up with it is because I found this when I was doing my PhD research. It was called Zones of Conflict, an Atlas of Future Wars. So I thought, well, I would really like to think about an atlas of future peace rather than an atlas of future wars. And at the time I had met Salim Ali, who wrote a book on peace parks. We met at a conference on peace parks in Waterton Glacier. So we started to develop this idea together.
이번 컨셉은 이제 NGO들이 서로 협력을 하는 경우도 있지만, 대부분 접경 지역에서는 양쪽 간의 협력이 굉장히 어렵기 때문에 어떤 디자인이나 미래에 대한 계획을 같이 하려다 보면은 함께 해야 되기 때문에 그때 필요한 어떤 툴, 도구가 필요한데 그것을 생각해보는 그런 프로젝트입니다.
So I did a workshop I was funded by the universities in Switzerland, and we did a workshop with some Turkish Cypriots from these NGOs, Friends of Nature, and Cyprus Community Media Centre, a biologist who was studying the biodiversity in the buffer zone, and then also Christina from the Centre of Transitional Justice. And we also had somebody from the UNEP program in Geneva, and somebody from the University of Geneva. So the idea was also bringing these people from Cyprus, but also people from these international organizations. And we had two students, architecture students, who were doing the sort of development and the mapping of this project. So we had a funded workshop where we spent a few days elaborating this idea in Switzerland.
네, 이거는 하실 프로젝트 중에 하나인데요. 스위tzerland에 있는 대학에서 펀딩을 받아가지고 사이프러스에 있는 아까 그 말씀드린 그 매핑이나 어떤 툴들이 필요하다고 했었잖아요. 양쪽 안에 화합할 수 있으면은 그것을 진행하는 프로젝트였는데 대학 건축을 공부하는 대학생들도 와 있고, 그다음에 사이프러스에 있는 기관들뿐만이 아니고 그런 어떤 아키텍처랑 어번 플래닝에 대한 지식을 가지고 있는 외부 인력들도 같이 와서 한 그런 프로젝트였습니다.
And this was another workshop that we did in Marseille that was funded by the Art Science Residency. So for me what's really interesting is often really the art and science because often we can't really talk about the politics, but art and science, artists and scientists can talk together and we can work on these visions. So that's why this Art Science Residency was a good venue. And there was also someone from Korea, Professor Kwi-gon Kim. I'm not sure if you know him. He's a specialist. He's done a lot of studies of wetlands in the DMZ. He's a professor emeritus at Seoul National University. Yeah.
이거는 프랑스 마르세에 있었던 워크숍인데 어떻게 보면은 아트랑 사이언스는 서로 협력하고 대화를 하기 되게 좋은 그런 분야이기 때문에 이렇게 모이셨고요. 그다음에 어떻게 보면 이제 정치나 그런 것도 굉장히 경제도 중요한데 끼기가 조금 힘들어가지고 일단 아트와 사이언스를 시작하셨고, 지금 한국 과학자분도 한 분 오셨는데 습지에 대한 연구를 많이 하시고 하는 분인데 서울대학교 메리터스 프로페서라고 하십니다.
And Dr. Azim Zaya, he's Professor of Public Policy and Environmental Planning at the at the University of Vermont, so that's why I'm collaborating as a senior research fellow at the Institute of Environmental Diplomacy and Security. So, and then we had obviously the Cypriots, the biologists and artists from Cyprus. So this was just the work in progress of how we were thinking about this. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I'll try to explain it. I don't want to read all of this, but it was actually hosted on the National Geographic Global Action Atlas. And this was just a sort of a prototype that we developed, so it's still something that's in the making. We just used a Google Earth platform. With the biologist, she was telling us, this is where the endangered species are. So the icons are not very well developed, but the idea was, that this could also be populated by people and scientists and would have different layers. And so we were trying to see where are these species in the buffer zone. Sorry, I'll let you.
이 워크숍들은 요점이 보면은 어떤 다양한 시각으로 보고 그다음에 다양한 분야들을 융합하기 위해서는 어떤 도구나 방법이 있어야 되는데 그것 중에 하나를 여러 가지 차원의 다양한 스케일과 다양한 요소들을 집중적으로 보는 그런 매핑, 지도를 만드는 그런 작업이었거든요. 그래서 과학적뿐만이 아니고 문화적으로를 통해서 그것들을 융합하는 지도를 만드는 그런 워크숍이었습니다.
So this was interesting because we were also using data sets that were available from other sources. And here we were interested in the Mediterranean monk seal because it's one of the most endangered species of seals, and also it's on the red list, even most endangered mammals. And it had been sighted in Cyprus in the area of the buffer zone, but not by the scientists, by the military, because they sit all day looking at the sea. And these species are very shy, and so in the buffer zone there are no boats, there's no navigation. So that was really interesting that actually that information came from the military. And so then what we were trying to do is to see where are the other areas in the Mediterranean. So this is sort of the regional approach also to the biodiversity.
이 데이터는 여러 가지 그 매핑을 하다 보면 굉장히 많은 데이터를 접하게 되는데 이거는 멸종 위기에 있는 멍크실이 어디서 사이프러스 지역에서도 발견이 됐는데 그거를 보여주는 지도입니다. 굉장히 특이한 점은 그 물개 중에 종류의 하나인 것 같아요.
The Mediterranean monk seal.
그래서 물개 종류가 많은데 그 중 하나인 것 같아요. 근데 되게 특이한 점이 이것들이 이렇게 보였던 것들이 사이팅이 된 게 과학자들에 의해서 된 게 아니고 군인들이 그 버퍼존을 갖다가 항상 지켜보다 보니까 우리나라 케이스와도 약간 비슷한 것 같아요. 그 지역에는 과학자들이 들어가기 힘들잖아요. 그러니까 군인들이 이런 자료를 갖다 넘겨줘가지고 여러 소스를 통해서 이런 데이터를 통해서 여러 가지 맵을 만들게 됐는데 그 중에 하나고 어떤 지역적인 접근 방법을 보여주는 그런 지도 중에 하나입니다.
So the idea of this atlas obviously was that it could be used by people, who were collaborating on this border zone, and it could be, NGOs, it could be individuals, there could be, crowdsourcing information, and the idea was, the accessibility. You could have different levels. For example, maybe there's some information that it could also be used by decision makers or politicians or diplomats. So you could actually have different levels of access. So, maybe sometimes the maps are, not authorized for public access. So, you cannot make everything public. So there's the idea that it can be used by different levels of people and have different levels of access. And then also viewing and editing. Not everybody can necessarily edit. And then, there's also data sets that you can find from experts and others that could be crowdsourced. The granularity, that just means, that you can zoom in and out, just as we saw before, we zoom out to the regional level, or you could zoom in, even to a village or a small hotspot, that you could search it by different taxonomies. That also you could do the time scale, looking at different time scales. And then the idea is to then start to look at the project, how do you use that as a design tool for designing a sort of future master plan. So this is just illustrating the different types of communities. Some can view, certain layers. Some can view and edit. Some can only view. And some can, the users. So this was just an illustration of this. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
지금
Getting carried
굉장히 특이하신 게 이 건축적인 마인드 그리고 얼반 플래닝에 대한 마인드를 가지다 보니까 이런 생태적이나 어떤 히스토리에 대한 걸 갖다가 굉장히 지도적으로 보고 있어요. 지도 차원에서 보고 있는데 애틀라스라는 게 이렇게 지도를 갖다가 여러 가지 타입에 모아놓은 그 전집을 애틀라스라고 하잖아요. 그래서 그런 프로젝트를 하고 계신데 그거에 대한 이제 특성을 설명하고 계세요. 예를 들어서 첫 번째 같은 경우에는 사용하는 사람들이 법을 만드는 사람들이나 뭐 예를 들어 정책을 만드는 사람들 같은 경우에는 아무나 액세스를 갖다 레벨을 두어서 퍼블릭이 볼 수 있는 것들 그리고 그렇지 않은 것들을 갖다가 자료를 나눌 수 있고 그걸 갖다 업데이트하고 에디팅하는 것조차도 퍼블릭이 할 수 있는 거 아니면 전문가들이 할 수 있는 거 나눠볼 수도 있고 그 다음에 어떤 맵들은 어떤 전문가에 의해서 할 수 있고 어떤 거는 이렇게 아까 그 버름석 같이 사람들이나 이런 군사나 전문적인 소스가 아닌 데서도 그런 것들도 올 수 있고
Yes, thank you. So here you can just see the different types of data, where it's an expert database from NGOs or academics, could be from UNEP or it could be from UNESCO or from scientific research. This is collaborative, where people could collaborate together on this mapping, or it could also be crowdsourced. You could have apps to have crowdsourced information.
그래서 세 개의 지금 레벨을 보고 있는데 하나는 전문가 그리고 하나는 이제 같이 하는 것들 그리고 하나는 일반적으로 다른 데서 올 수 있는 그런 것들을 얘기하고 있습니다.
And also then you can also zoom in and out to different
스케일로
scales.
스케일이 중요하다 보니까 가까이 또는 멀리서도 볼 수 있고요.
And also to search by different kind of parameters.
그리고 자기가 입력을 해가지고 원하는 것들을 찾을 수 있는 그런 기능도 필요하고요.
And then also the timeline, that you could have different timelines if you're creating a scenario of the future, or you could also look at obviously historical maps, so that you
지도를
can have.
통해서
Sorry, go ahead.
지도를 통해서 이제 시간을 스케일을 보고 역사적으로 어떻게 왔는지도 볼 수 있는 그런 맵이 되겠습니다.
So then here, this was at the time we were also looking obviously at the stakeholders and what kind of stakeholders there are. They're cultural, so this is by theme, and then it's also by level, if it's international NGOs, local NGOs, local stakeholders or academics. And then also the different approaches, whether it's environmental, support facilities, economic, cultural and heritage. So it was just kind of mapping the stakeholders, and I tried to do another mapping sort of looking at who were the Greek Cypriots, the Turkish Cypriots, which ones were in the middle, which was the UN, etc. So it's just kind of trying to map the different stakeholders.
그래서 이해관계들을 보여주시는 건데 아무래도 이제 맵이나 어떤 도표를 통해서 많이 보시거든요. 그래서 이렇게도 보고 저렇게도 보고 그래서 아까는 레벨이나 성격을 통해서 나눠보고 이거는 서로 어떤 다이나믹을 가지고 있는 문제를 통해서 보여준 도표입니다.
And there was just, actually you can see here, there was only, this is the UN, but there was just two bicommunal, the Turtle Association and the BirdLife Cyprus, they're actually a bicommunal association, and the Cyprus Wind Association. So it was interesting to see that these NGOs were actually, they were bicommunal between Greek and Turkish Cypriots.
이런 걸 통해서 양쪽 해당 사항이 있는 것들을 여기다 넣어놓고 그래서 모든 이해관계자들을 갖다가 이쪽인지 저쪽인지 보여주고 있거든요. 그래서 한쪽은 터키시 쪽을 보여주고 있고 그 다음에 이쪽은 그리스 이해관계자를 보여주고 있고 NGO 같은 경우에는 중간에 들어가 있고
I think it's just so that. Yeah, so this is just an aerial view showing, zoom in some of these ideas. So as you can see, this is all agriculture, but the idea of this sort of green landscape laboratory is that all the farming that would be implemented would be organic farming, the tourism, all the buildings would be green buildings, and also this is, we can't see, but the rivers, so we would rehabilitate all these riparian corridors. So it's just zooming into some of these ideas, and you can see very well the patrol path here. It's very clear. And of course, it's like the idea in Germany. The idea is that you preserve this patrol path because it's already there, and it becomes the backbone, and it's a trail for bicycles and tourists, who can just go along the whole green belt.
그래서 사이프러스 그린 벨트를 갖다가 이제 지도로 보여주는 거고 아까 이제 스케일 얘기했는데 이제는 줌인을 해가지고 굉장히 자세히 보는 건데 지역이 어떻게 사용되는지 그리고 거기 나와 있는 중요한 요소들 같은 경우에 여기는 트레일이 있고 그다음에 여기는 코리도가 있어가지고 양쪽에 왔다 갔다 그 생태계 그 와일드라이프가 왔다 갔다 할 수 있는 것들이 있고 그다음에 사람들이 있는 거 사람들 거주지 중간에는 이코투리즘이 가고 그거보다 먼 지역에는 오가닉 파밍이 있는 지역을 갖다가 지도를 통해서 보여주고 있습니다.
So here I was also interested in looking at water because Cyprus has a lot of problems with water, you know, the supply of water. As an urbanist, also as a planner, I work a lot on blue urbanism. I think it's really important to look at, also this is obviously a geological map, and I think when we're building or designing, we need to look also what's underneath the earth, what we have underneath. And so this was looking at also the underground, the map of the infiltration zones, because that's where the water infiltrates. So I think that's very important anyway for planning in any kind of field, but I was particularly interested in looking also for the demilitarized zone.
이 지역 같은 경우는 사이프러스의 물의 공급이 문제가 되는 경우가 많기 때문에 그리고 도시 개혁의 중요한 요소가 물이기 때문에 이 지도를 보고 있는데 이건 지질학적인 지도입니다. 그래서 물이 어떻게 분포되어 있는지 그리고 어떻게 도시에 유입되고 있는지를 보여주고 있는 지도예요.
And this is interesting because this is the walled city and the Venetian walled city. But in fact, before they built the city, when the Venetians came, they diverted the river. So before they built the walls, the river used to come through the city like this, and then they diverted it around.
이 도성은 베네치아인들에 의해서 지어졌는데 이렇게 원래 지나가는 강을 갖다가 이걸 지으면서 밖으로 they diverted, but it's back to where it is now.
No, this is just showing the walls, the new walls, and the river. So it's not back to where it is now. This is like a anachronic.
So they diverted it to have it go in the city?
No, outside. Yeah. I'm sorry, it's not very clear, but maybe here you can see. Yeah. So this is better. This is. Sorry. We do that. Oh, we do. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I just will do whatever we can. I mean, I have lots more, but you know, we can.
And also we can talk over dinner as well.
Okay,
Because I'm sure
okay.
everybody will be keen to ask questions.
Okay. Just tell me how much time I have.
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, so I'll go very fast. What I'll do is I'll stop on some slides and some I'll just show you with a few words. Huh? Okay, anyway, I just wanted to show you very quickly. This is the Byzantine, then this is the Venetian, so the water is going around. And then this is the buffer zone. So the buffer zone is in the same area as the water, as the river. Somehow the buffer zone is where the river used to be. You see?
역사적으로 있던 걸 보여주는 거예요. 지금 버퍼존이랑 리버랑 같이
Yes.
지나가고 있어요.
So this was first the river, then it became the commercial axis, and then the buffer zone. The dead zone, they call it the dead zone. But when I was there, this is one day when I was there, and it was flooding, and you know, so they don't have enough water, but then it floods, and why? Because in fact we always try to change nature, but in fact what happens is when it rains, the river comes back down because of the topography. The river is looking for its, you know, going back to its bed. So this gave me, do you want to translate or is that
저
okay?
플러딩이 있는 이유 중에 하나가 예전에 원래 있던 강을 갖다 움직이다 보니까 비가 오고 그러면 자연적으로 원래 자리를 찾으려고 하다 보니까 이렇게 홍수가 나는 거예요.
So that's when I thought that any future plan for the buffer zone should look at water, stormwater management, and should, you know, try to allow the, you know, have a system where it's going to actually take the rainwater and collect the rainwater. So the green line, when we transform it, would become a sort of stormwater management and would recreate the bed.
그래서 이 버퍼존을 갖다가 앞으로 계획을 하다 보면 이런 요소들, 물이 어떻게 흘러가는지, 하수가 어떻게 되는지 같은 그런 요소들도 안 볼 수가 없기 때문에 아까 그 봤던 그 물이 어떻게 움직이는지 그런 지도도 굉장히 유용하고 꼭 봐야 되는 부분 중에 하나입니다.
So this is the monk seal I told you about. See, he looks like a monk. And I'm just showing you sort of the region. This is the whole Mediterranean where you have the monk seals. And this is a military map of the contested zones between Turkey and Greece. So they still have some issues, border issues. And it's actually the same area as the monk seal habitat. So it's just showing that the military contested area is the same area where the the monk seals are.
예를 들어서 아까도 어떤 이렇게 지도를 보다 보면 굉장히 똑같이 나오는 부분이 많잖아요. 그 물이 있는 부분이랑 리버가 있는 부분이랑 그다음에 버퍼 존이 있는 거와 마찬가지로 이 멍크시리 있는 사는 그런 지역도 하비태트도 지금 이 사이프러스와 이 터키의 그 접경 지역과 코인사이드 똑같이 나오는 경우가 많은 거예요. 그렇다 보니까 지도들이 서로 의미가 있고 서로 공유하는 부분들이 많은 것을 지도를 갖다가 여러 스케일을 보다 보면 그게 보이는 거죠.
Thank you. So before I said there was some scientists that collaborated with the help of UNDP to do a study of biodiversity. So these are the animals that you could find. Obviously these were found by the military, not by the scientists, but there is the mouflon, which is a very also was endangered, the fruit bats and the turtles.
그리고 이렇게 맨 처음 거는 군인들에 의해서 됐지만 과학자들이 지금 생태 다양성을 위해서 어디에 분포돼 있고 어디 서식하고 있는지 그걸 보여주고 있는데 그것을 보여주는 지도입니다.
And I know similar work has been done for the DMZ as well.
그리고 우리나라 DMZ도 이와 비슷한 연구가 되고 있는 것을 알고 있습니다.
So the mouflon, interestingly enough, they found an abandoned village here, and there was a whole community of these mouflon in the village.
사람들이 떠난 그런 마을이 하나 있었는데 이 무플론이라는 동물이 와가지고 거기서 모여서 살고 있었습니다. 사람이 떠난 자리에.
Also birds. Obviously, there's different birds and habitats in the green line. And this is obviously the idea of converting, keeping. This is in a way, this is the future heritage. So the idea is you could keep these structures, and instead of being, for watching out for people, is they're just transformed into watching for wildlife.
이런 초소 같은 경우도 우리가 유산을 보고 사람들을 봤던 그런 스트럭처를 갖다가 앞으로는 동물들을 보는 그런 구조물로 바꿀 수 있습니다.
So we also look at the idea of the heritage trail. So this is the old city, and as we saw with the green belt in Germany, the patrol path is a cycling path, and when I was there in Cyprus, there were not many people cycling, but I found this picture in 1950, and this is in 64, the UN soldiers. They cycled over 190 kilometers from Nicosia along the Green Line, and this is another in 2010. So the idea of this patrol path becoming a future path for cycling and soft mobility.
이것도 마찬가지로 초소가 사람들을 감시하던 것들이 앞으로 유산적인 의미를, 문화유산적인 의미를 가져서 동물들을 돌보는 것 같이 예전에 군인들이 경비를 쓰던 그런 길들도 앞으로 사이클링 파트로 바뀔 수 있는 것으로 그렇게 계획할 수 있습니다.
So this is also in the Green Line, and here I've just looked at, here you have a Catholic, Armenian and Maronite church. You have 3 different churches here. So this is quite an interesting area. Here you have 2 markets, so the idea is to sort of link the markets here. And this is very interesting, is because you have 2 museums here, and they're museums of national struggle. So they're very nationalistic museums. One is very Greek nationalistic, the other is very Turkish nationalistic. And so one question here is, do we get rid of these nationalisms, or do we actually keep them as part of the heritage? So my idea is to say, in the buffer zone we create a new space which refers to these and reinterprets what the nationalism is, or because in a way we have to go beyond nationalism, but I don't think we should erase these nationalist museums, because they're really part of this whole story.
이 그린 라인을 갖다가 중심으로 보면은 양쪽에 따로따로 여태까지는 있었기 때문에 같은 역할을 하는 것들이 있습니다. 예를 들어서 마켓도 이쪽에도 있고 저쪽에도 있고, 심지어는 이쪽에 보면 뮤지엄이 있는데 내셔널 스트러글 같은 경우에는 이제 이 나라 사람들이 얼마나 자기 나라를 위해서 애국가들을 보여주는 그런 뮤지엄이 되겠는데, 이쪽에서는 그리스, 이쪽에서는 터키 해서 굉장히 다른 주제는 같지만 다른 대상들을 보여주는 그런 뮤지엄 같은 경우인데 그러면 이것들을 갖다 그대로 둘 것인지 아니면 어떻게 이것들을 갖다가 미래에 가지고 갈 것인지가 큰 이슈 중에 하나인데 예를 들어서 하나의 제안은 이 중간 접경 지역에서 새롭게 이것들을 새로운 공간을 만들어서 내셔널리즘, 국가주의라는 것들을 아예 새롭게 해석하는 그런 공간이 필요하다고 생각됩니다.
And another idea is also to keep, because actually the patrol path, they've created a really new way of, moving in the old city. And so I think some of these structures should be kept for artistic spaces. We should keep some of this, of this new kind of spatial forms and the way it's been used for military, and we can keep these as art spaces.
예를 들어서 이제 이것도 하나의 제안 중에 있는 건데요. 실제로 있는 건 아니고 이 경비를 쓰다 보면 보초를 쓰다 보면 예전에는 없었던 구도시 안에 새로운 동선과 어떤 성격을 가진 그런 길이 생긴 건데 그것들을 없애지 않고 예술적인 의미를 가지고 있는 공간으로 특히 그렇게 되다 보면 이제 예술적으로 갤러리 같은 것들이 적합할 것 같은데 그런 것들로 탈바꿈시켜서 보존하는 것이 프로포즈 중에 하나입니다.
Sorry. This is based on a project, this is the Association for Historical Dialogue, and this has been with the help of some of the embassies, and this is very good because it's important to have a space in the buffer zone for dialogue between both sides, so they can meet, and they also talk about, for example, one thing that they've tried to do on both sides is to change the history books that they give for the children, because the history books often have a very divisive and nationalistic history that they teach the children. So that's one of the things that they've been working on here, which is very important.
그 버퍼존 안에 있는 기관 중에 하나인데요. 양측이 서로 대화를 가질 수 있는 그런 공간입니다. 왜냐하면 서로 굉장히 다른 입장을 가지고 있는 분야가 많은데 예를 들어서 그 중에 하나가 역사적 교과서를 갖다가 서로 합의할 수 있는 그런 내용을 가지고 새로 만들 수 있는 그런 프로젝트들이 여기서 진행되고 있습니다.
And this is inspired by a project in Beirut. I'm sorry, the image is not very good, but this was developed, as you know, in Beirut there was also a green line when they had the war in Beirut, and it was divided between the Christians and the Muslims. And this garden of forgiveness is in the center, just around here. And it was developed with all the communities and all the different faiths, and it was also an archaeological site, and it was called the Garden of Forgiveness.
이것도 새로운 이 지역은 베이루트 전쟁 후에 생긴 그린라인에 대한 그런 프로포즈였는데요. 이 경우에는 나라뿐만이 아니고 종교적인 이유에서도 굉장히 디비전이 있었던 건데 이것을 Garden of Forgiveness, 서로를 용서해주는 그런 가든을 넣으면서 요거를 갖다가 이렇게 합치고 서로 그린라인을 탈바꿈하는 그런 프로젝트였습니다.
And I proposed a similar thing in one of the bastions in Nicosia, and I think this idea of forgiveness is important because there's a writer called Paul Ricoeur. He wrote about memory and forgetting, and I read a lot of this for my PhD. I was very interested in creating a landscape of memory, but then I thought, well, sometimes you also need to forget because when you can't forget, then you can't move on. And it's very interesting to look at memory, forgetting, but also forgiving, because in fact, we need to have the forgiveness often, because otherwise we cannot change and move on and create a new society. So I thought this idea of the Garden of Forgiveness was an interesting one. This was also in Budapest, and I was thinking, what do you do with all these monuments? This was for the communists and Stalinism, but what do you do? Because in Cyprus they have a lot of monuments of Ataturk. They're very nationalistic. They had a lot of monuments of the Archbishop Macarius. Huh?
One of my favorite statues.
Oh yes. And there's a lot of this heritage. So the idea is that they actually made a park of this. And this is Macarius. He was in the center of the town. They used to have this huge statue of him. And on the other side they had this huge statue. So this was in Berlin when they were taking him down, Stalin. And this is this is Kemal Ataturk, and this is Macarius. You can see all these kind of symbols of of the nationalist figure. And you know, so you say, well, okay, we should maybe not get rid of them, but it's good to have this idea. You can have a memento or a park or a space where you bring all these memoirs. So this is actually, this was how his face was in the city in North. This is Ataturk, so it's a huge face. And I was just provocative because I said we should put Venus, because Venus was born on the island of Cyprus, and I said there's always these big male figures, but we don't ever, maybe we should see Venus sometimes, you know, because so this was just a bit of provocation, but so yeah, that was also the provocation, saying, you know. So this is just an exhibition that I did in Cyprus, and this was some work where I showed a video, some images, and this was a series of chess sets that I made in relation to the buffer zone.
이거는 사이프러스에 있었던 전시인데요. 비디오도 있었고 그다음에 직접 만드신 체스판입니다.
So when I was actually finishing my PhD in Harvard, I decided to take an art class. I didn't tell my PhD advisor though, because you know, they wanted me to be serious in writing, and I needed to express myself in another way because I was just always on the computer writing. And also at Harvard, there's an architect called Le Corbusier, famous architect. And his only building in America is the Carpenter Center. So I took an art course in the Carpenter Center, and I had a studio in the penthouse. So, you know, I was really happy to be in his building because Le Corbusier is from Switzerland, and the professor I had was actually an artist called Stephen Preener, and he was an artist and a musician. So it was also quite interesting for me. Anyway, I decided. I said, okay, what am I going to do? I wanted to do something in relation with my work on borders, and I had a drawing, and I started just, you know, didn't want to use a computer, I just wanted to draw. So I started drawing, and I had a map of Nicosia, and I realized that there were 8 squares. You know, maps, they always have a grid. And so then I thought, well, that's actually like the chess. And then I said, well, chess is actually 2 front lines. I mean, chess is the border, you know. And then it said, yeah, well, of course, you know, that it's the whole thing about the border. And then this one is actually an homage to Joseph Beuys, this one here. And it's weaving with copper and metal, iron. It's a weaving of iron and copper. It's in homage to Joseph Beuys because he had a piece with iron and copper, and it was a balancing of masculine and feminine, because he said the feminine has more copper, you know, females always have a bit more copper and males have more.
Really?
Yes. And so for me this was an homage to him, but I also thought because we have to balance the masculine and feminine, so, and also because I realized that chessboard was really a weaving as well. You know, it's a weaving of 2 territories. And so I started, you know, I also wrote an interesting book called The Chess Queen. And it's all about how chess started in India, Persia. And they didn't have a queen, they had a vizier, which is a wise man. And then when it came to Spain with Queen Isabella, it was transformed into the chess queen. And what's interesting in chess is really, the king has the symbolic power, but in fact the real power is the queen. I mean, she's the one who really, she's the one who can move around, and she's the one who actually, you know, has the power to, the biggest power. So anyway, I became very interested, and that's how, sorry, I didn't give
지금
you a chance to.
얘기하시는 거는 학문적인 업적뿐만이 아니고 이제 예술적인 분야에 대한 걸 하시는데, 익스피디션에 나왔던 그 체스 세트에 대해서 설명을 약간 하고 계시죠. 근데 여기서 얘기하시는 게 그때 교수님께는 비밀로 해가지고 이런 것들을 했는데, 이 체스판에 관심을 갖게 된 게 니코시아 이렇게 지도를 보다 보니까 이런 스퀘어들이 계속 반복적으로 나오다 보는데, 어떻게 보다 보니까 이 체스판과 자기가 보고 있는 접경 지역의 상황이랑 많이 비슷한 게 양쪽이 대립하고 있고 이렇게 나뉘어져 있는 게 있고, 그 다음에 지금 우리가 얘기하는 그 인티그레이션이라는 그거를 굉장히 특이한 단어로 여러 가지를 많이 쓰고 계세요. 아키올로지라는 표현도 쓰고 계시고, 그 다음에 그 이분 글을 읽다 보면은 단어 선택이 굉장히 특이하신데 위딩이라는 게 있잖아요. 이렇게 천 같은 걸 이렇게 하는 걸 위딩이라는 표현을 굉장히 많이 쓰시거든요. 근데 체스도 일종의 어떤 위딩, 자기가 하려는 컨셉과 맞는 그 위딩을 보여주고 있기 때문에 체스판에 대해서 굉장히 관심을 많이 갖게 됐고 또 하나는 이제 개인적인 얘기인데 굉장히 유명한 건축가인 르코브지에가 스위스랜드 또 사람이신데 거기 그분이 만든 건물이 유일하게 미국에 하나 있는데 거기에 있는 스튜디오를 얻을 수 있었다고 합니다. 펜트하우스 스튜디오를. 그래서 이런 것들을 만들었고 특히
이제 건물이 미국 어디 있나요?
Where's 르코브지에?
Carpenter Center. It's in the campus of Harvard in Boston, in Cambridge.
캠퍼스 안에 있네요.
So it's part of the
리빙은
campus. It's a center of the arts.
중요한-
Yeah, it's
네.
called the Carpenter Center of the
근데
Arts.
건축적인 단어는 아닌데 굉장히 많이
But the
사용하고
exhibition was in Cyprus. The exhibition was in Nicosia. Yes. This was part of a project that was funded by the European Union, and yeah. Thank you. And we also produced a book, Stitching the Buffer Zone. I'm sorry I didn't bring you one. Yes, because I only had, it's out of print, and I only have, but I can send you the chapter in PDF, but unfortunately the book is out of print now, so I couldn't bring you a copy. So this was the, this is the homage to Joseph Beuys, and
조셉 보이스
And-
오마주였더라고요. 네.
what was interesting is that Cyprus, the name Cyprus comes from copper, copper, because they had the copper mines there, and even they sold copper to the Romans and everybody, and so this is the buffer zone. So I also used copper film to do the the buffer zone element. So the copper was quite important, for me. And this was just a chessboard with all the sort of the actors and territories. So I put the flags and the different people, and obviously I had just the two queens there on the board. So I don't know if we're going to stop here, or should I quickly go through the slides? But there's a lot of slides, so I don't know.
저것만 한 5분 정도 더 코리
I mean, I still have a lot of
퓨처
slides.
비전에서
Shall I just go through them quickly without translation? Shall we do it without?
If it's very visual, we can just browse through them.
I think so, because there's a lot of slides. I'll just say a few things and then you can maybe note if somebody... I'll just go very quickly, yeah. So this is what we saw, the concepts, and these are things that you probably know already, the sacred sites and the DMZ. But one thing I think is really important is the symbolic part of the crane. And so these are kind of really sacred sites and heritage sites. And I think what's really interesting for me was also looking at the shamanism in Korea. And when I was here last time, I saw the cranes dancing, and then in the evening I went to a performance and I saw a man dancing at the shaman, and he was dancing like the crane, It was so interesting. I saw both of those. So also the Marine Peace Park, I'm sorry this image is not very good, but this is an area, obviously that's contested, I don't know what happened to the pictures, but the Marine Peace Park I think is very important also. And so this is just the mapping of the yellow tidal flats. So this is really important areas in this area of the Marine Peace Park. So it has a great potential, and it's very important for climate change and this whole area of the Peace Park between North and South Korea. I just wanted to mention actually this Monks Hill Reserve as a sort of. So this is something that I did in Harvard with the Korean students, because the Korean students there didn't really know the buffer zone, and it wasn't something that was sort of studied. So we did a small study of the buffer zone, and we started to look at all the different kinds of, the mediascape, the technoscape, etc. And so, they started doing the different mapping of the territory. And also one of them studied the Kaesong Industrial Complex. One of the students wanted to see, what is these connections that have been created? And there's an infrastructure, there's an activity that's going on there. One of the students actually started to map the two cities. And I think one thing that's really interesting, which I'll mention at the end, is looking at both cities as well. Here it was really looking at the social and cultural trends. You know, what is the same cultures they still have, and what are the different ones? You know, so to see what's still common between both sides. You can see here that there was still the common holidays between the north and the south. Obviously the currency, looking at the different economies and the currencies. And this was really interesting because it's also going back and looking at the whole peninsula and also the regional and the geo-ecological conditions. And we were talking about that earlier, was saying we really have to collaborate because there are so many future threats that we really should, one of the good reasons to collaborate with North Korea would be to say, well, we really have to address, and whether it's possibly fires in North Korea, dust clouds, etc. There's and now we have obviously the pandemic, but there's also obviously climate change, biodiversity loss, all of these things. Another student actually looked at the wetlands because there's a lot of wetlands in this area, and that's also the work that Professor Kim has done a lot of work with his students, is looking at the wetlands. I was also interested, obviously, is looking at the art and the different installations and what kind of artwork has been done around. This was one that was done about art reconciliation and memory. By an artist called Ik-Shun Kan. So here you can see the military actually are making all this this installation of a wall there, and this is just the way people, individuals kind of have some kind of memorial marking as well. How people do that. So these are also the very official, different types of memorials that you have on both sides. Then I also started to look at the sacred sites, that we have before. Obviously we were looking at UNESCO sites, but also looking at the types of, what are the sacred landscapes, and then obviously which ones are the most, the close ones around that area. And the common heritage, of course, like looking at the mountain gods, that we had in Korean shamanism, and they provided security and peace. So just trying to go back to some of these ideas and to see if they're still, would they still be relevant to the people on both sides. So these are also questions. Now this is work by a student that I met, that she did with her students as well. So these are different projects that she developed, and it was looking at different types of interventions. So there's aquaculture and farming, agricultural landscapes, etc. And so she was looking at aquaculture as something that could be installed, developed between the two sides, or the agricultural landscapes, how to deal with the different islands, what kind of interventions, how the territory would adapt as well. And this is also, I'm not sure if you know the Real DMZ initiative. This is an art initiative as well, so obviously you know about this. And this is one just recently that I'm not sure if you've heard about this one, which is to make a bridge. Do you know this one?
아 이거 설치미술가가 한 거예요.
최재은.
최재은이라는.
Yeah.
2-3년 전에.
And what was interesting, this one I thought, was also the idea of having a seed bank.
유럽에서
Having a seed bank in the tunnel. So there's different ideas. And these are some case studies that I did with my students, looking at, these are transboundary sites between Germany, the Netherlands, and looking at these are areas which were mining areas, and then looking at the kind of projects where they reconnected across the border, and they have this red line which is connecting all these kind of mining sites. And then what kind of landscapes they create in these industrial areas. So here you can see also the green metropolis. So there's this kind of line, the pink line, which is the backbone. And then there are different landscapes that are proposed. So these are just case studies to sort of illustrate. And this is the last one, I'm going to go very quickly, is for Cyprus is we started to look with our students as how we could respond to food, water, energy and waste in the Green Line. So the idea of this is saying, yeah, no, go ahead. Yes.
Infrastructure, we talk about.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, we can talk. Maybe we can discuss. Yeah. Do you want me to go back there, or do you want to?
I think we're good to go.
Okay.
We can talk about it over dinner.
Yes. So what for me was important here was to say that obviously whatever we do in the Green Line or in the DMZ, the idea is how do we address the future threats. So whether it's biodiversity loss, climate change, also the food, water, energy, waste nexus. So saying how do we also address that. So this project for Cyprus was another project I did with my students, and there we took food, water, energy and waste. So I'm going to go very quickly as well through this one. But this is the Green Line, and it's saying waste, water, energy and food. And so we were looking at the different areas, locations for talking about waste, waste management, waste recycling, organic waste, landfills, urban waste, concrete waste. This is the ghost city, so it's all made of concrete, so how we reuse the concrete as islands, making artificial islands. And then the water, which is very important, so what types of water we have there in Cyprus. And then the different water infrastructures, and also wetlands, obviously the natural, because these are also very important, the wetlands. This was in Varosh, I think this was also with the wetlands, yeah. So this is also using water in these landscaping signs. And this is the restoration of the riparian areas, so with the wetlands and the buffer zones. And the copper mines, so these are abandoned copper mines here, so they're really important because we can really create a new cultural landscape with a copper mine, because it's so much part of the culture of Cyprus. This is the national park in Nicosia. Then we have the energy infrastructure. So once again, we map the different types of energies and then how they can be implemented and used. And then the food, obviously, what kind of food growing areas, what kind of food growing systems. There's even the idea of floating farms, floating fish farms, etc. Organic farming, etc. So, I didn't want to go into detail, but it's just showing that it's another approach, is addressing which are very important questions, is addressing this. And one of the ideas that I thought about was, the eco-regions is, so of course we have to think in a much larger, approach. As we know, I think this map is interesting because we see the lighting, so we can see that, of course it's negative. On the other hand, the positive thing is that, maybe their carbon footprint is lower than ours, but so one of the things I was thinking is the Grand Master Plan. That was something we discussed with Professor Kim, because he's also a planner, and saying that we should really start thinking also for the future of a Grand Master Plan for the two Koreas. So I just found some maps, but saying where are the most urbanized areas, because the north is obviously not developed. It has a lot of problems. But it has maybe the added is that it is less developed. It has more land availability. And then if you quantify that, even from a real estate point of view or from a nature point of view, you could actually, it could be interesting to sort of have a really large strategic development plan for both sides. Because then I think it would make the north people think, well, it actually has benefits as well. You know what I mean? Because we have a very negative view because they're not so developed, but maybe sometimes places are not so developed, they have other
more potential,
potential, and they have maybe from maybe natural and biodiversity, they have more things. So one of the things we have to look at is also the environmental master plan, and for me the DMZ, there's a lot of different initiatives, and I think what will be really interesting now is to try and put them all together and layer them and try to bring them together in some kind of a master plan. and also that you have pre-reunification strategies, which is, as I said, in Berlin, you know, the forces of real estate go really fast. So, you know, what can we do now before there's any kind of solution? And then what can happen afterwards? And one thing is, of course, you have to freeze the development in the really hot areas so you don't get what happened in Berlin. So that's really important. But obviously before that you can do the research. One of the ideas I had for Cyprus, and even here, is even having, you know, an ideas competition, for example, you know, for the DMZ or for certain areas, is to bring in the thinking and the ideas on that. So these are some of the things I found as well. This is the DMZ Forum, but they had a pilot project for agroforestry, also the restoration of the red-crowned, this one. This is actually in the book that I've edited. There's a chapter on this one. And then the DMZ, the Peace and Nature Park. So I also thought we could develop this in the digital dynamic atlas. That could be an interesting project to try and develop this integrated atlas where we're bringing all the ideas together. And also a planning workshop, you know, to have a really a kind of gathering and where we really, you know, planning and putting together ideas on paper to try and bring together all of these ideas. Another idea I had was also having something in Geneva, because we have all the UN, you know, the UNEP and IUCN and Ramsar, and there's also a representation of North Korea. And the International Design Competition, design studios, to try and sort of develop, you know, these comprehensive master plan for the two Koreas. And also sort of starting to say, you know, what would be the right kind of sites of memory that we should make for this space, you know, so you're talking to the different communities involved, whether it's the North Koreans, South Koreans, the victims, and even international, because I think there's also international victims from, you know, from the UN, from the military and things like that. And this is a new initiative in Geneva, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, which has just been started, and so I'm very interested to see what they're doing and to sort of, you know, bring this idea to them, to say maybe, you know, there's this idea of science diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, you know, some potential to bring. And this is just North Korean children and South Korean children, and, you know, to remember that, of course, what we're doing is for them and for their descendants, and, you know, all the work we do is for the future generations. And unfortunately, this is a video of the cranes dancing, but I don't have the video here, so I can't show it to you. But I'm sure you've all seen that. But I was very lucky to go once with Professor Kim and to actually see them dancing. Yes, so yeah, I think that's really quite special. 감사합니다. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the translation.
Very, very helpful. It was an honor.